Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. We were about 3 miles up the trail when my cousin Kaylin said she wanted to stop for the night. We'd been hiking since late afternoon and were just past the old fire road up near Ridge Bluff, above the tree line. You can see most of the valley from up there, and when it's clear out, the stars don't have to fight much light pollution. It was early October in northern Arizona, dry and cool. Not cold yet, but the kind of crisp where once the sun's gone, you're putting on a hoodie whether you want to or not. We found a level patch just off the trail behind a few scrubby pines and set up the tent. It was one of those backpacking kinds, low and narrow. I handled the fire. We brought those freeze-dried meals you eat with boiling water, so it wasn't like we needed a big setup. Around 9:30, the wind started to pick up a little, but not bad. Just enough to make the trees hiss a little if you weren't talking. The moon was just past half full and still low, so most of the sky was dark enough to really see everything. We stayed by the fire until it burned down. Kaylin was talking about her ex again, something about him borrowing her bike and never returning it. I remember zoning out partway through and just staring up at the sky. That's when I first noticed it. There was a patch above us, directly above, that didn't look right. At first, I thought it was a cloud, just a dark wedge blocking out the stars. But there was no shape to it, not like the rounded edge of a cloud. It was sharper than that, more geometric. I squinted at it, and something about the edge made me stop mid-sentence. "Do you see that?" I said. Kaylin looked up, blinked a few times. "What?" "That patch. Up there. Looks like something's blocking the stars." She leaned back on her elbows and stared up for a good 10 seconds. Then she sat upright. "Oh yeah, what is that?" It looked like an empty space, a triangle maybe, but not lit. Just darker than the sky around it. You could only really tell it was there because the stars behind it, just faint pinpoints, would vanish when they crossed into that area. Not all at once. Just slowly, as if something huge was passing between them and us. It was moving. Not fast, not spinning or anything dramatic, just gliding, maybe half a mile above us, maybe more. No sound, no lights, just an absence. We both stood up without talking. The fire was down to coals and the breeze had stopped. I tilted my head, trying to get a better read on the edges of it. It was sharp. 3 sides. A triangle, I think, but not a perfect one. More like one point was longer, stretched out. Kaylin whispered, "Is that a drone or something?" But I've seen drones. We both have. This thing was massive. There was no frame, no visible body. Just a shape moving over the stars, blotting them out. I grabbed my phone and pointed the camera up. Couldn't see anything, just grainy blackness. Then something else happened. About 20 yards behind us, down toward the trail, there was a sound. Just one single click, like metal tapping stone. We turned at the same time. There was nothing there. No lights, no animals, nothing moving. I kept staring at that patch of trail. My ears were ringing a little. We waited, silent. I don't know how long. Then Kaylin tugged my sleeve and pointed up again. The shape had moved. It was farther east now, sliding behind a thin cloud, and the stars started blinking back into view behind it. Still no sound. We stood there until the sky looked normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't gone far, like it was circling. Back near the fire, I added another log, even though it was already late. I didn't want to get in the tent yet. Neither of us did. Kaylin finally broke the silence. "You don't think it was just a cloud, right?" "No," I said. "Clouds don't move like that, and they don't have corners." We heard that click again. Same spot. Like something small, maybe a boot heel, hit a rock. I turned and walked toward the trail with my flashlight, shined it through the trees. There was nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. We debated hiking down that night, packed up the essentials just in case, but it was after midnight by then, and we didn't know the trail well enough to risk it in the dark, so we stayed up. Took turns keeping watch, which felt silly, but I couldn't sleep anyway. Around 2:45 a.m., I stepped out to pee and looked up one more time. A new patch of stars was missing. Same shape, same movement. It drifted for maybe 2 minutes, then just stopped. It hung there, completely still, as if watching. I backed into the tent without turning around and zipped it shut. We left at dawn, didn't even eat breakfast. Just packed everything in silence and walked down the trail without stopping. Neither of us said anything until we got to the car. I was flying from Bend to Missoula, late afternoon, early spring. It was a Cessna 182 I'd rented out of Printeville, nothing fancy, older but solid. I'd made the trip a dozen times before, usually to see my brother and his kids. Weather was decent, a little choppy near John Day, but otherwise clear skies and steady air. I took off around 5:10 p.m., sun still high, but low enough that everything had that soft, golden tint to it. Visibility was great. You could see the Cascades way off to the west, snow still heavy on the peaks. I leveled out at 9,500 feet and held course. About 40 minutes in, I noticed something off to my right. At first, I thought it was just a glint, sunlight bouncing off another plane, maybe higher altitude. But there weren't any traffic advisories. Nothing showed on the Garmin, and I wasn't on a busy corridor anyway. It looked like a metallic sphere. Not huge, maybe 6 or 7 feet across. It was hard to tell. No wings, no exhaust, no markings. Just smooth, reflective, and totally silent. I watched it for a solid 10 seconds before realizing it was moving, slowly but definitely keeping pace. I called in on the radio. Bozeman Center, November 652 Charlie, do you have traffic at my 2 o'clock, same altitude? They came back a moment later. Negative 2 Charlie, no traffic in your vicinity. I didn't say anything else. Just watched it. The thing was maybe 300 yards out, off my right wingtip. It didn't bob or tilt like a drone, just hovered in place. Matched my heading exactly. I tried banking slightly left, just a minor correction. The sphere adjusted immediately. I pulled the yoke back a little, gained about 100 feet. It climbed with me, perfectly. It wasn't aggressive, didn't zip in or anything, just tracked. I can't really explain how wrong that felt. It stayed with me for 18 minutes. I know because I glanced at the dash clock constantly. I kept expecting it to peel away or drop back, but it didn't. Just hovered, steady, never wobbling. I grabbed my phone, tried to get a picture. The second I pulled it up, the object drifted slightly backward, like it could tell. When I aimed the camera out the window, all I caught was sky glare. Then it stopped pacing me. It paused midair, maybe 2 body lengths behind and to the right, held there for a second, then shot upward. Not at an angle, straight up, like if you tied a string to it and yanked it into the sky. No acceleration curve, just gone. I didn't hear anything, not even a whoosh. I stared out the window for a long time. I didn't even think to contact the tower again. When I landed at Missoula, I did the usual post-flight checks, but my hands were shaking. I didn't say anything to the guy at the hangar, just signed the log and went to the rental car. Later that night, I checked flight radar in case there were any weird military operations. Nothing. The next day, I called the airport in Prineville, asked if anyone had reported drone activity along that corridor. The guy said no. Asked if I'd seen anything interesting. I said no, I haven't seen it again. But now every time I'm up, I look. I saw the ring early that morning, right after I let the dogs out. It was maybe 5:45, just light enough to see where I was stepping. Dew still heavy on the grass. We've got 40 acres just outside of Wamego, Kansas, mostly pasture now with some soy that never took too well in the north plot. I'd walked out back like I always do, cup of coffee in one hand, watching our 2 border collies, Tuck and Millie, race around like idiots. That's when I noticed it. Down past the back fence, maybe 70 yards out, was this perfect circle in the grass. It wasn't burned. It wasn't flattened. Just dead. Brown and dry, like it'd been clipped with a mower blade dipped in bleach. I thought at first it might have been fungus. We'd had fairy rings show up before, especially after heavy rain. But this one was clean. Too clean. It was maybe 20 feet across, ring about a foot wide, and then the inner grass was just as healthy as the stuff outside. There were no tracks, no signs of anything having been there. Tuck ran right past it, didn't pause, but Millie stopped at the edge. She stood just outside the ring, stiff, ears up, tail low, wouldn't go near it. I crouched down and touched the grass. It crumbled under my fingers like straw, dry, brittle, but not scorched. And when I scraped at the dirt with my fingernail, it was moist underneath. No dryness below, just the surface layer. That didn't make sense. I checked again after breakfast. The dogs had come back in by then, and the sun was fully up. I brought my phone, took a couple pictures, but they didn't capture it right. Looked like nothing out of the ordinary unless you were standing right there. I walked a wide circle around the thing, looking for tire marks or footprints. Nothing. No insects dead in the ring either, which I thought was weird. Not a single ant or beetle or worm. That afternoon, I called my neighbor Kent. He's lived out here his whole life and knows more about Kansas soil than I ever will. He drove over in his old Dodge, pulled up next to the field, and we walked out together. Huh, was the first thing he said. Then he squatted and poked around with a stick. No scorch marks, he said. You sure nobody sprayed something out here? No one's been back here, I said. Not even me. We both stood there for a while, just kind of staring at it. Then he said, give it a week. If it spreads, let me know. It didn't spread, but it didn't fade either. It stayed exactly the same. That was a Wednesday. By Saturday, I noticed another one. This one was smaller, maybe 10 feet across and deeper in the property, near the line of cedars where the deer like to bed down. Same thing, perfect circle, dried grass, moist soil, no prints, no damage to the plants around it. That's when I started checking every morning. First thing, the third ring showed up the next Tuesday. Then a fourth 3 days later. They were all spaced far apart, no pattern, different sizes, no smell, no heat, nothing to feel with your hand. But the dog started acting weird. Tuck, who's usually the bold one, started refusing to go out unless I went with him. Millie, who'd always slept under the table in the mudroom, started sleeping upstairs next to my bed. One night around 2 a.m., I heard both of them growling low at the back door. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. Everything was quiet. No wind, no coyotes howling, just this flat, heavy stillness. I scanned the field but didn't see anything. No glowing lights, no movement. But when I swept the beam toward the cedars, both dogs backed up, tails tucked. I didn't hear anything. The next morning, I found a fifth ring. This one was the largest yet, almost 30 feet across and overlapping the edge of the tree line. Something about that one really bothered me. The others felt like oddities. This one felt like it wasn't meant to be seen. That afternoon, I dug a core sample from the middle. I took it back to the barn and looked at it under the old desk lamp I use for small repairs. Top layer, dead grass. Half an inch down, perfectly normal soil. Healthy worm movement, moisture, root structure intact. Like the death didn't go deeper than the surface. Like it had been shaved off with invisible fire. I called Kent again. You find anything new? He asked. Just more of them, I said. He didn't sound surprised. I asked if he'd seen anything like it before. He was quiet for a second, then said, once, back in the 90s, over near Alma, but that one went away after a month. Then he said, you might want to keep the dogs in at night. I already had been. By the end of that week, I'd found 2 more rings, 7 in total, all different sizes, all perfect circles. On Sunday morning, I noticed something new. In the farthest ring, the very first one I'd seen, I found 3 holes. They were small, maybe the width of a quarter. In a straight line spaced a few inches apart, too small for a post hole digger, too precise for an animal. They didn't go deep. I slid a zip tie down one to check, maybe 8 inches before it stopped. They weren't there the day before. That night I stayed up, sat in the dark with the porch light off just watching. Tuck and Millie curled up on either side of me. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I saw the flash. Not a light, exactly. More like a shift, a shimmer of heat, like off a road in summer. It passed over the backfield quick. Just a flick, and the motion lights didn't trigger. The dogs both stood up, staring into the dark. Neither barked. I sat there another hour, gripping the flashlight, but nothing else happened. The next morning, the 8th ring was there. I didn't call Kent. I didn't take more samples. I stopped walking the property. The rings started fading in late July, not gradually, just all at once, like something let go. By August, the grass was growing back. I mowed the field twice since then. There's no sign they were ever there. But every now and then, Millie still won't go near that first spot. She skirts it wide, nose low, ears pinned. And last week I found one of those little holes again. Just one. Right by the fence. Nothing else. Just that. I woke up in the driver's seat of my car with my hands still on the wheel. It was 3:42 a.m. I remember because the dashboard clock was the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes. I didn't even register where I was at first, just stared at the glowing numbers and felt this slow panic rise in my chest like I'd missed something important. The car was off. Keys in the ignition, but turned all the way back. I was parked on the curb outside my apartment, same spot I always take when I get home late and everything closer is taken. The street was empty, quiet. Not even a breeze moving the leaves on the sidewalk. At first, I thought maybe I'd had a rough night, driven home, and passed out in the car. But then I noticed my shoes were off, and the driver's seat was reclined more than I ever set it. And I hadn't driven anywhere that day. I'd gotten home around 6:30 p.m. from work, same as usual. I remember feeding my cat, her name's Dot, she's old and loud, and making a cup of tea while scrolling through emails. I definitely remember brushing my teeth. I had a small cut on the inside of my cheek from biting it earlier that day, and I remember how much it stung with the mint toothpaste. I remember getting into bed, turning on the little fan I keep by the window. I had on an old green t-shirt and sweatpants. That's what I was still wearing in the car. I sat there for a long time, trying to piece it together. The seatbelt wasn't on. The windows were rolled up. My phone was in the passenger seat, like I'd just tossed it there. When I picked it up, there were no new notifications. Nothing weird in my texts or calls. The last app open was Spotify, a sleep playlist I always use, one I'd played in my room when I went to bed. I looked around. The lights were off in every window on the street. Nothing moved. I live in a little 4-unit building. My place is upstairs in the back. From the curb, you can see my window if the blinds are open. They weren't. I always close them. I left the car and stood on the sidewalk for a second, barefoot, arms crossed, trying to shake the weirdness off. I didn't feel drugged or sick, just off. Like I'd missed a step going downstairs and was still waiting to hit the ground. I walked up to the building. The front door was locked. That didn't surprise me. I always lock it behind me. But the deadbolt was turned from the inside. Inside the stairwell, it was quiet. My upstairs neighbor's dog, Benny, usually barks at anything after 10 p.m. He didn't make a sound. My apartment door was shut, locked. I had to go back down to my car to get my keys from the center console. When I opened the door, Dot came running like nothing was wrong, meowing loud, weaving around my ankles. Her food bowl was empty. Litter box hadn't been scooped since the night before. All the lights were off inside. The fan in the bedroom was still on. The covers were pulled back on one side of the bed. My pillow was dented like someone had slept there. I checked every room, tiny bathroom, closet, kitchen, nothing out of place. No signs anyone had broken in. Windows were shut. My phone never left my hand. I couldn't go back to sleep. I sat on the couch with Dot curled up next to me, going over everything I could think of. Did I sleepwalk? I've never done that before. Around 5 a.m., I opened my phone again and checked the Ring app. There's a doorbell camera on the front door, and the landlord lets tenants access it. There was footage from the night before. At 2:17 a.m., the feed clicked on, and there I was, walking barefoot down the front steps. No jacket, just my green t-shirt and sweats. I didn't look around. I didn't pause. Just walked straight to my car, got in. I never turned the engine on. The headlights never came on. The feed eds never ended. 2 minutes later, no one else came or went. The weirdest thing? My eyes were closed. In the video, the whole time I walked, even while getting into the car, my eyes were shut. I didn't tell anyone for days. I kept waiting for something else to happen. Another night like that. But nothing did. The next morning, I checked my bedroom window. The blinds were closed, but the window itself, it was unlocked. I always lock it. I check it every night. There was dirt on the windowsill, and a faint smudge like someone's fingers had pressed into the glass. I was coming back from my sister's place in Maine, somewhere between Augusta and Belfast. It was mid-November, cold but not quite snowing yet. Around 10:30 p.m., I was cutting through these winding back roads near a town called Morrill. trying to shave off time instead of sticking to the highway. I'd taken the same route a dozen times, so I wasn't too worried. There was this thick fog rolling through, real heavy. One of those fogs where you can only see maybe 20 feet ahead with high beams, and even that's pushing it. Everything was muted. Trees just became darker patches in the gray, and the road disappeared under it. I was alone in the car. My dog, Ruckus, usually rides with me, but he stayed behind at my sister's this time because her kids love him, and I figured he could use the break from car trips. Kind of wish he'd been there. Anyway, I was maybe 15 minutes outside of town when the headlights started bouncing off the fog in this weird way. I thought it was just how dense it was, but then I realized it wasn't just my beams. It looked like there was a glow ahead of me. Not headlights, not taillights either. These were higher up, too high for a car, and way too still. There were 4 of them, arranged in a kind of line, 2 spaced farther apart, then a tight cluster of 2 closer together on the right side. They weren't blinding or flashing, just glowing steady and soft, kind of a bluish white. I slowed down a bit, figuring maybe someone had pulled over or there was construction equipment or something. But I didn't hear anything. No engine, no machinery, just the hum of my own tires and the heater blowing. The weirdest part was how the lights didn't move. I mean, fog plays tricks on your eyes, sure, but these just floated there, completely still, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the road. I stopped the car, literally rolled to a stop right in the middle of the road, and left the engine running. I leaned forward over the wheel, trying to get a better look. I turned off the headlights, thinking maybe it would make them clearer. It didn't really help. The lights stayed where they were, glowing through the fog like they didn't belong to anything solid. There was no shape behind them, no beam either, just orbs, like they were part of the fog somehow, lit from inside. I rolled the window down. That's when I realized how quiet it was. You know that weird silence when fog's thick and there's no wind? This was like that, but deeper. No crickets, no wind in the trees, nothing. I didn't even hear the ticking of the cooling engine, which usually happens when I idle too long. I kept watching them. A few minutes passed, maybe less. I blinked, just a normal blink, and the lights were gone. Not faded, not moved, just gone. The road was empty in front of me. I turned the headlights back on and crept forward, scanning the trees on either side. There weren't any tire tracks in the frost on the shoulders, no sign anyone had pulled off, and the fog hadn't moved. After about 50 yards, I stopped again, got out this time. The air was cold, heavy with that wet smell fog carries, but there was something else, like hot wires almost. That ozone bite you get after something short circuits. I walked around the car with a flashlight. No animals, no power lines overhead, no other cars for miles. Back inside, I kept driving. I stayed below 40 for the next half hour, eyes locked on the road, glancing up every few seconds at the sky, but I didn't see the lights again. Just when I started thinking I'd maybe imagined the whole thing, my radio cut out. I wasn't even listening to anything, just had it on low for background noise. But it cut out and started hissing like someone was tuning a frequency that didn't exist. I reached over to shut it off, but before I could, it snapped back to normal. Same station, same volume. It only lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it was enough to make my hands start sweating. No cell signal either. I checked just to make sure I wasn't going totally nuts. I had bars when I left Augusta, but they were gone now, and they didn't come back until I was almost to Belfast. The only other thing that happened before I got back was around the last bend before hitting Route 3. There's a big open stretch of field there. Usually you can see some distant farmhouse lights, but this time it was pitch black, like the fog had swallowed everything. As I passed that field, the inside of the car got weirdly bright for half a second, like lightning, but there wasn't any thunder. No flash outside the windows, just inside. Everything lit up, then it was gone. I didn't see anything when I looked back, nothing in the mirrors. The fog looked the same, the sky was the same, dark gray. I didn't stop again after that. Just drove straight through, got to my place a little before midnight. Everything seemed normal at home. Ruckus wasn't there to bark or greet me, which made the place feel even quieter. I turned on every light and just stood in the kitchen for a while, feeling kind of stupid for how tense I was. But the thing is, I've driven those roads for years. I know fog. I know how it plays with depth and light. But those lights were real. They weren't a trick. And I know I didn't imagine how they disappeared. I didn't look away. I didn't blink long. I just blinked, and they were gone. I was hiking alone through the Wallowa Mountains in northeastern Oregon, a spot I'd come back to a few times over the years. This time was early October, the kind of morning where the sun had just started creeping through the thick pine needles, and there was a crispness in the air that made you want to pull your jacket tighter around you. I had my backpack, a couple of protein bars, and a thermos with some lukewarm coffee. My dog, a lanky husky mix named Nico, was trotting a few feet ahead, nose to the ground as usual. The trail I was on wasn't marked on any maps I'd checked, but it was clear enough to follow, a narrow dirt path winding through dense forest. I like this kind of solitude. No cell phone signal, no other hikers in sight, just the sound of twigs snapping underfoot, Nico's panting, and the occasional call of a jay or woodpecker. About 2 hours in, I reached a spot where the trail suddenly stopped. The path ended abruptly at the base of a thick patch of fir trees. I figured the trail probably continued through the forest, just not maintained anymore. I glanced at the GPS, but as expected, it was sketchy and didn't show any clear path ahead. I debated whether to turn back or try to push forward. That's when Nico barked, sharp and insistent. I looked where he was focused and saw something strange on the ground, not far from the trail's edge. A series of large, perfectly circular impressions pressed into the dirt and leaf litter. Each one was about 2 feet across, maybe more. They were spaced evenly apart in a straight line going deeper into the forest. I knelt down and ran my hand over one of the impressions. The soil was compacted, but not disturbed otherwise. No tire tracks, no footprints around them. Just these big, round indentations, sinking into the earth like some heavy object had been set down and dragged forward. But the thing is, the forest there was dense. Thick underbrush, fallen branches, and trees growing so close together I couldn't imagine any vehicle making a straight line through it like that. Curious and more than a little creeped out, I decided to follow the line. Nico stayed close, moving carefully through the trees. The impressions kept going, maybe a dozen or so in a row, all identical in shape and size, spaced about 3 feet apart. No other disturbances around them, no crushed plants or broken branches. It was like whatever made them had hovered just above the ground, leaving these prints as it moved. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but as usual, no signal. Still, the camera worked. I snapped several shots, trying to capture the size and spacing of the marks. Something about the way the light hit the impressions made them look almost unnatural, too perfect, like they'd been stamped. After about 100 yards, the line stopped. No more circles, no clear trail continuing beyond that point. I scanned the area. The trees were close together, shadows falling sharp across the forest floor. I felt the air get colder, or maybe it was just the shade. Nico was quiet now, sitting at my feet and looking around nervously. I decided to backtrack toward the main trail. On my way back, I noticed something odd. The sounds of the forest had changed. Usually, there'd be birds chirping, insects buzzing, but now it was almost silent. The wind had died down completely, no rustling leaves, nothing. It was a kind of heavy stillness that made me tense up. When I got back to where the trail had ended, I paused. Something made me turn around. At the edge of the clearing, just between two thick firs, I thought I saw a dark shape standing still. It didn't move as I blinked or shifted my gaze, and then when I looked again, it was gone. I called out softly, but only Nico answered with a low growl. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably a trick of the light or a deer disappearing into the shadows. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. I started hiking back down the main trail toward my car. The sun was lower now, sending long beams through the trees. Nico was quiet, sticking close by my side. Every few steps I glanced behind me, half expecting to see something, but the forest looked empty. About halfway down, I spotted more of those circular impressions. This time they were fewer, scattered, and less uniform. They led off the trail into a tangle of bushes, fading quickly. I couldn't figure out why they'd appear here, like a second, less obvious trail. I kept moving, trying not to think too much about it. When I finally reached the parking area, I was sweaty and tired. I pulled out my phone to look at the pictures I'd taken. The images of the impressions were there, but when I zoomed in, something about them felt off. The circles looked blurry, like the camera hadn't quite focused on them right. I scrolled back through my other photos from the hike, but none of the shots of the forest looked like they did in real life. The colors were washed out, and in some pictures, I swore I saw faint shadows moving just beyond the tree line. That night, I tried to shake off what happened. I told a few friends about the impressions and the weird silence, but they just joked about bears or big logging machines. No one else had seen anything like it. A few days later, I went back with a friend and a GPS. We found the trail end again, but the impressions were gone. The ground looked untouched, like it had never been marked. No signs of the deep, circular prints or the straight line cutting through the forest. I checked satellite images of the area, zoomed in close, but nothing stood out. No tracks, no disturbed ground, just dense trees and shadows. I'm not sure what I saw that day. The impressions, the silence, the shape in the trees, none of it fits together in a way that makes sense. I've been back a few times since, but nothing unusual has happened again. Still, when I'm out there alone, I sometimes feel like something is watching just beyond the edge of the trail. And those circles, perfect, heavy, silent, they keep coming back to me. I was working the night shift at the old distribution center off Highway 26, just outside of Brooks, Oregon. It's mostly a skeleton crew during the day now. One warehouse manager, a forklift guy, maybe a driver or two, but they keep a guard on overnight just because of the copper in the wiring and the occasional vagrant looking for a dry place to crash. I'd been working there 3 months when it happened. It was late March. Cold, but not freezing. That sort of damp cold that settles in your bones and makes your knees ache. I always brought a thermos of coffee and a sandwich, and I'd spend most of the shift either making rounds or sitting in the little booth by the front gate listening to AM radio. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 9:56, right before the gate timers switched over. Walked the outer fence, checked the loading bays, peeked in the warehouse windows. Nothing unusual. Around 12:40 a.m., I was out back near the tree line, where the fence curves along the drainage ditch. There's a big patch of woods that runs behind the property. Not dense enough to be a forest, but thick enough that you can't see more than 30 feet in. I'd always hear owls or raccoons moving around in there, especially that time of night. That's when I saw the light. It came down slow, pale blue, almost white, but not bright. Just enough to see the tops of the trees change color. At first I thought it was a drone, but it wasn't bobbing or shifting like drones do. It just descended steadily and then stopped. Hovered there, no sound, and then everything went quiet. I didn't even notice it at first. It was like my brain registered it in stages. The breeze stopped, no more rustling, no chirping, no distant highway hum, no freight trains from the next town over, just complete, dead silence. I stood there for maybe a full minute, just listening. The kind of silence that makes your ears feel like they're plugged. I backed away from the fence, slow, and radioed into the booth. The other guard, Gary, had the night off, so I was alone. I told myself it was probably a helicopter or weather balloon or something from the ag station. Back in the booth, I tried to call the supervisor just in case something needed reporting, but the line was dead. Not busy, not voicemail, just dead. No dial tone, no static, nothing. I tried my cell and it wouldn't connect either. No bars, no signal icon, even though we were only 20 minutes from Salem. Then the AM radio cut out. It was just one of those late-night call-in shows, guy talking about highway ghosts or something, and it just stopped mid-sentence. Static for a second, and then nothing. That's when I started to get really uneasy. I went outside to check the gate, just pacing the lot to keep my head straight. I figured I'd walk a loop and wait for my phone to pick up a signal. That's when I noticed the air felt weird. Like static, but not electric. Thick, like walking through a room that someone had just left. That leftover warmth that shouldn't be there outside. At 2:11 a.m., I saw the light again. It hadn't moved. Still hovering over the trees, no shape to it, just a color. Then it blinked once, not off and on, just changed. like a pulse. I swear to God, I felt it in my teeth. I walked back toward the rear fence again, even though I didn't want to. I think I just needed to see it up close, or prove to myself it wasn't real. When I got close, the air felt heavier. Not hot, not humid, just thick, like breathing with a cold towel wrapped around your face. And the silence was worse. My own footsteps sounded wrong, like they were being swallowed before they hit the air. I kept blinking, trying to adjust my eyes. Everything looked flat, no depth, like the shadows weren't behaving right. Then I saw something move, not in the trees, in the air, like a ripple, just for a second, maybe 30 feet in front of me, like something invisible passed between me and the light. No sound, no wind. I turned and walked back to the building without running. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. Inside, none of the lights would turn on. Power was still flowing, emergency panel showed green, but the fluorescence wouldn't hum up. I sat in the break room with the flashlight on, drinking lukewarm coffee out of the thermos and watching the window. At some point, I must have nodded off. I remembered jerking awake and the flashlight had gone out, even though I had just replaced the batteries the week before. I looked at my phone. Still no signal. The time said 4:22. Still silent outside. No birds. No wind. No headlights on the distant road. I sat like that until 6:03 a.m. That's when the noise came back. First a breeze, then distant traffic, then a bird call, sharp and sudden. And just like that, everything was normal again. I walked back out to the rear fence as the sun was coming up. The trees looked fine. No fire damage, no tracks, just wet ground and new buds coming in. I looked up. No sign of the light. Just the usual low clouds. My phone buzzed. 4 missed calls from my sister, a few junk emails, a weather alert for coastal fog 2 counties over. I went back to the booth. The landline had a dial tone again. The radio was playing farm reports. I didn't report anything in the log, just wrote routine shift, no incidents. Didn't feel like trying to explain it. Still doesn't. I was 16, and it was one of those rare warm nights in late October here in rural Vermont. Not quite cold yet, but crisp enough that my jacket felt right. I'd grabbed my binoculars, nothing fancy, just a hand-me-down from my dad, and headed out behind my house. The backyard opens onto a small clearing surrounded by thick woods, and it's about as dark as you can get without leaving town. I wasn't out there for any reason besides boredom and a little curiosity. I'd gotten into stargazing recently, just because it was quiet and felt like something to do other than scroll on my phone all night. I'd learned a few constellations, and I liked trying to spot the satellites or whatever they were. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright. But I mostly just liked looking at random spots and seeing what I could make out through the binoculars. My dog, a scrappy mutt named Juno, was with me. She usually stuck close but had a habit of wandering off and barking at nothing, which I figured was just the usual forest sounds. Anyway, I was looking up near Orion's belt when I noticed this bright white dot. Not a satellite, not blinking like an airplane, just steady. It looked like a star, but it was lower than the others, closer to the treetops in the distance. I focused the binoculars on it, adjusting for the shake in my hands. That's when things got weird. The white dot split into 2 points of light. They drifted apart slowly, maybe 2 or 3 degrees of separation, and then after a few seconds they started moving back toward each other until they merged again into a single point. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. It didn't flicker or change color. It was just like the star itself had decided to split in 2, then put itself back together. I lowered the binoculars and blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. Juno looked up from sniffing some leaves, her ears perked like she sensed something off too. The backyard was quiet except for the usual rustling in the woods. I raised the binoculars again, but the light was gone. Not just moved, but completely gone. The spot where it had been was just empty sky like it never existed. I checked the area around it, scanning up and down, left and right, but no sign of it anywhere. I stayed out there for a while, just staring up, waiting to see if it would come back or if something else would happen. But the sky was normal, no other weird lights, no changes, just a bunch of regular stars doing what stars do. The next day, I told my sister Morgan about it. She's 2 years older and skeptical about anything strange, so she said I probably just saw a satellite or some kind of optical illusion. I thought that might be right at first, but I kept thinking about how solid and clear the split was. Satellites don't do that. I watch a lot of night sky stuff online. Later that week, I tried to find the exact spot in the sky again with the binoculars. Nothing. I couldn't find the star or whatever it was. I asked my parents if they noticed anything strange out at night, but they hadn't. Just the usual sounds of the woods. There was another thing that night, though. After the light disappeared, I thought I heard something in the trees, like a soft rustle, but not like wind. More like footsteps or something moving slowly through the brush. I called out to Juno, but she stayed still, staring off toward the tree line, her body tense. I didn't hear anything else, and after a minute, it went quiet again. It wasn't like the usual night sounds out here, the owls, the crickets, the distant dogs barking, but a different kind of silence, like something stopped paying attention. I've spent a lot of nights outside since then, looking up, but I haven't seen that star again, or anything like it. Juno still sometimes freezes and stares into the woods like she did that night, but nothing ever shows. I don't know what I saw. It wasn't a plane, not a drone, not a satellite. The way it moved was wrong for anything I'm familiar with. The woods around here are full of hunters and hikers, and we get occasional small planes flying over, but none of them do that. I guess that's why it sticks with me. Not because it scared me or made me feel like I was in a movie, but because it didn't fit. Just a white star splitting into two and then vanishing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else saw it. I was 2 hours into a shift I wasn't even supposed to take when I caught it. This was last December. I'd covered for Miguel, who'd called out with the flu. Overnight shifts are mostly quiet, just keeping an eye on radar, monitoring systems, checking cloud activity. I work at a small regional weather station in central Utah. Nothing glamorous. Our satellite feed is usually so uneventful, I've caught myself dozing off during playback. That night started out the same. Dry air. No major pressure changes. Just cold and still. I'd brewed a fresh pot of coffee around midnight and was flipping through archived Skycam recordings from earlier that day, mostly out of habit. Sometimes I flag clips for training or grab decent stills for social media. The Skycams are mounted on towers at various outposts. We've got 5 around the area, each pointed slightly different directions. It was just after 12:30 a.m. when I started reviewing the footage from Station 3, the one just south of Fish Lake. The camera angle there's good, wide view of the upper sky with minimal tree obstruction. I usually scrub through on 8x speed, just looking for storm activity or lightning, but something flickered near the top right of the frame, real fast. At first I thought it was a bird, or maybe a bug that got too close to the lens. But I slowed the playback and went back a few seconds. The object moved from the far upper corner to dead center in less than half a second. I paused, rewound, played it again at normal speed. It wasn't streaking like a meteor, and it wasn't flying like a plane. There was no arc to it. It just appeared, zipped diagonally, left to right, then down, and then it stopped, midair. I ran the clip again, frame by frame this time. It moved about a third of the way across the screen in a perfectly straight line, then stopped dead and shifted direction. I mean a complete 90-degree angle. Zero curve, just a sudden turn, then another. I leaned in so close to the screen I could hear my own breathing. It made 3 impossible turns in under 2 seconds, then slipped behind a cloud bank in the upper center of the frame. That was the last frame it showed up in. The cloud it went behind just sat there, slowly drifting like the others. No motion disturbance, no exit point. The object never came out the other side. I checked timestamps. The cloud bank stayed in frame for another minute and a half. If anything had emerged, I'd have seen it. There were no shadows, no noise, nothing reflected on nearby surfaces. I went back and ran the clip again at full speed. Unless you knew to look, you'd miss it. Just a faint glimmer in the upper corner, a zip, and gone. I checked the time code, 4:17 p.m., earlier than I'd expected. Still light out then. Sky was overcast, but the cloud cover wasn't thick. I pulled up the corresponding radar for that hour. Nothing, just light wind readings and flat pressure across the board. I checked flight paths. There were no scheduled commercial or private flights in that quadrant. Closest was a cargo plane headed south at 32,000 feet, miles off course from where this thing had moved. And birds don't fly like that. Neither do drones. I called Leo, our tech specialist, just to rule out a glitch. He was half asleep and irritated, but agreed to remote in and check the raw video. 10 minutes later, he messaged me, "Yeah, it's real. You sure this isn't a bug?" He enhanced the contrast and zoomed in on the object. It wasn't just a flash or a light. There was a shape to it, not distinct, maybe triangular but not solid, almost like it had no defined edges. I didn't know what to say. I just kept watching it, rewinding, playing, pausing, watching that sharp right-angle turn again and again. The way it moved reminded me of how a cursor jumps on a screen when a mouse skips, like there was no inertia. Around 2 a.m., I decided to pull up the other Skycam feeds from the same time. None of the others showed anything out of the ordinary. Except Station 5. That one's east-facing, positioned about 20 miles from Station 3. At exactly 4:14 p.m., 5 seconds after the object disappeared behind the cloud, there was a single flicker of light at the edge of that feed. Just one frame. I zoomed in. Could have been lens flare, could have been a glint off a plane, but it looked the same. Same weird shape, same slight shimmer at the edges. That one never moved, just blinked in and out like a skipped heartbeat. I didn't report it. Not officially. We're supposed to log anomalies, sure, but this felt different. I just noted a brief sky glow artifact in the playback notes and moved on. The rest of the shift, I couldn't focus. I kept rewatching the clip, checking time codes, trying to figure out how anything could move like that. Even military aircraft don't stop midair and change direction without some kind of banking. I went outside around 4 a.m., stood behind the station where it's pitch black and just looked up. Sky was clear, cold, windless. The stars looked perfectly normal. But I kept thinking about that cloud the object vanished into, how it didn't ripple, didn't shift, just floated along like nothing had happened. I've watched thousands of hours of sky footage. Storm cells, hail patterns, light pillars, satellites, auroras. I've seen weird things. Nothing moved like that. Nothing ever just disappeared. I was working the night shift at Crabtree Point, off the coast of Maine. Small lighthouse, automated now, but they still keep a person out there year-round to do maintenance and monitor the fog signal. That person's been me since 2019. I don't mind the isolation. The pay's decent, and I've always liked the sea. Crabtree's on a rocky outcrop about a quarter-mile off the mainland, reachable by boat or a narrow footbridge that floods during high tide. It's not one of those tall, whitewashed towers you see in calendars. It's squat, gray stone built in the 1800s. The keeper's quarters are attached, 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen. No neighbors, no traffic, just gulls and foghorns. This happened in early March 2022. Cold night, calm water, which is rare out there. I remember that clearly because there wasn't even a breeze and the water was like black glass. No moon, just stars. I'd finished checking the battery logs around 9 p.m., made myself some soup, and was reading on the cot when I noticed the light was dimmer than usual. Not flickering, just lower. I keep an old brass lamp near the window, and I remember thinking maybe the mantle was going out. When I stood up to look, I realized it wasn't the lamp. It was everything. Outside the window, the stars were gone. Not all of them. Just the patch of sky above the water, maybe 100 yards out. Like something massive was blocking them, but I couldn't see what. At first, I thought maybe fog had rolled in, but the fog's different. It glows in the beam, and this was just black. I stepped outside onto the catwalk that runs around the base of the light. The air was perfectly still. Not cold like it had been. Almost warm, weirdly. That patch of sky was still dark, too clean-edged to be a cloud. Then I noticed the water. It wasn't moving, like not just calm, flat. No swell, no ripple, no reflection from the light at all. It was like the sea had just stopped being water under that patch. I squinted and leaned over the rail, and I saw it. A shape, not in the sky, on the water. Huge, darker than anything around it. Angular. That's the word that stuck in my head. The edges didn't make sense, too sharp in some places, too soft in others. No lights, no sound, just sitting there, maybe 200 feet across. It didn't bob, didn't shift, didn't reflect. The ocean just ended where it started. I stood there staring at it for maybe 5 minutes, waiting for it to move or vanish or give off some kind of signal that made it make sense. Nothing. Eventually, I walked back inside and grabbed the old binoculars we keep in the cabinet. They're not great, but better than nothing. When I looked again, the shape was still there, clearer now. It wasn't a boat. I've seen cruise ships, Navy carriers, private yachts. This wasn't any of those. It had no lights, no bridge, no masts or rails or windows, just this matte black mass sitting motionless above the water, low but not quite touching. And the air around it felt heavy. That's the only way I can explain it. Like the pressure shifted. My ears popped standing there. I heard the gulls stop. That was when I really started to feel uneasy. There are always gulls out there, always. But the silence was total, not even the waves below, just me, breathing. I went inside and checked the radio. Tried calling the mainland station, no response. I tried the Coast Guard repeater channel, nothing. The screen was lit, but no audio. I checked my phone. 1 bar, which is more than I usually get out there, but no data, and no calls would go through. After that, I just sat in the chair by the window, watching it. No movement. The darkness around it spread just slightly, like the black was bleeding into the sky. Around 2 a.m., I dozed off, not deeply, just nodded forward. When I woke up maybe 20 minutes later, it was gone. The stars were back. The water moved again. The gulls started up like someone flipped a switch. The strange thing was, when I went outside, the railing on the far side, facing the water where it had been, was wet. Not like rain, just that one spot. 6 feet across, like someone had thrown a bucket against it. But the air was dry, and there was no wind. I walked the perimeter and didn't see anything else. By morning, the radio worked again. I didn't report anything. I just marked it in the log as unidentified surface reflection observed 2045 to 0200, no radio contact, no incident. That's all I wrote. I stayed the rest of my rotation, but I didn't go out on the catwalk again at night for a while after that. I was camped out near the Little Belt Mountains in Montana, just off one of the lesser-used trails south of Kings Hill Pass. Early October. Cold nights, but still dry. I'd gone up for a long weekend, just needed to get away from people. I'd taken the Subaru as far up the forest road as I could, parked in a little pull-off, and hiked in maybe 2 miles. Not backcountry, but far enough that I didn't see another person the whole time. I'd picked a flat clearing maybe 40 yards from a small creek. No cell signal, no distant engine noise, no power lines, just trees and the sound of water. First night was normal. I set up camp around dusk, single-person tent, nothing fancy, and had a small fire going before full dark. Ate some jerky, read a few chapters of a book by headlamp, and called it around 10. I woke up a couple times from the cold, normal for that time of year, but otherwise slept fine. Second day, I did some light hiking, filled my bottle from the creek with the filter, saw a hawk, took some photos. I didn't go far, just needed the quiet. That night, I stayed up a little later, let the fire burn longer, had a nip of whiskey to warm up. It was dead quiet, except for the creek and the occasional snapping twig, probably squirrels. I climbed into the tent around 11. I remember zipping the fly shut, taking off my boots, crawling into the bag. Everything was where it should be. Backpack by my feet inside the tent, camp stove and food bag hung off a tree maybe 20 yards out, bear line taut. I didn't hear a thing all night, not a single sound. I woke up just before dawn because I was cold again, but this time something felt off before I even sat up. First thing I noticed was my boots weren't where I left them. They were inside the tent, near my hip, lined up neatly. Not muddy or anything, just moved. I sat up and unzipped the fly, thinking maybe I'd sleepwalked or nudged them in my sleep. That's when I saw the rest of it. All my gear, everything I hadn't brought into the tent, was laid out in a perfect circle around me. I mean perfect. The camp chair, my little cooler, the folded tarp, even the hatchet and the water filter bag, spaced evenly around the tent like spokes on a wheel. My backpack was leaning against the side of the tent, upright, zipped. The stove was on one side, my mug on the other. Even the firewood I'd stacked was moved, neatly laid out in a straight line just outside the circle. And the fire pit, filled in. No ash, no rocks, just smooth dirt like no fire had been there at all. I got out of the tent slowly. The sun was just coming up. Everything looked normal. Trees, creek, mist over the water. But the air felt wrong. Not dangerous, exactly. Just off. Like walking into a room where someone had been talking about you and went quiet. I walked the perimeter of the gear circle just once. Didn't touch anything. No footprints. Ground was dry but soft enough it should have shown something. I checked the bear line. The food bag was untouched, still hanging. The rope had been coiled and set at the base of the tree. I didn't hear a thing all night. And it wasn't animals. I've camped enough to know raccoons or coyotes don't organize gear. I kept turning in circles, like maybe I'd see someone watching from the trees. But there was no one. No broken branches, no drag marks, just my stuff, arranged like a display. That's the only word I've got for it. It felt like a display. After a while, I started packing up. Not fast, but not slow either. Every so often, I'd stop and just listen. Nothing. Not even birds. Usually at dawn, you hear them starting up, but not that morning. Just the creek and me. When I unzipped the tent fully to pack it down, I found my book tucked neatly under the sleeping bag. I'd left it in the outer pocket of my pack. The bottle of whiskey was upright next to it, unopened. I'd only had a few sips the night before. It wasn't until I was nearly finished packing that I noticed the tent itself had been rotated, only slightly, maybe 30 degrees counterclockwise, but enough that the door was no longer facing the creek like I'd set it up. The stakes were still in the ground. I got everything back into the pack and started back toward the car. Hiked quick but steady. Didn't stop for water, didn't eat. About halfway down, I started hearing birds again. One chirp at first, then another. By the time I hit the car, the forest sounded normal. I didn't see another person until I got back to the main road. When I got home, I laid out all the gear in the garage and checked it. Nothing missing, nothing broken. The tent had one small scrape near the base that looked fresh, like a fingernail drag through the outer layer. It hadn't been there before. That was the last time I camped alone. I was sitting out on my porch just after sunset, the kind of slow, orange-pink dusk that spreads over the neighborhood in early September. It was one of those evenings where the air still felt warm, but had a dry edge, and a few kids were playing down the street. I'd been outside with my phone, mostly scrolling through some news, but I wasn't really paying attention. My dog, a lean, wiry mutt named Rufus, was lying beside me, his nose twitching in the breeze. I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen, just a normal evening winding down after a long day at the garage. But then I noticed this shape in the sky, almost directly above the trees lining my backyard. At first, I thought it was a drone or maybe a small plane because it was moving slow and steady, but the shape didn't make sense. It was dark, kind of angular, and it wasn't blinking like an airplane's lights do. It also didn't have any navigation lights at all. I pulled out my phone to try and take a picture. I wasn't even sure why. I guess part of me thought I might be imagining things. The shape hovered there, silent, almost unmoving, just a little wobble here and there like it was hanging in place. I tapped the screen to open the camera, aimed it upward, and started snapping pictures. I took about 5 shots over the next minute or so, adjusting the focus a little. Rufus got up and started growling low, looking toward the woods beyond my yard. I thought maybe it was just a raccoon or something, but then the shape in the sky changed. It shifted from this dark, rigid-looking form to a more amorphous, almost liquid-like glow. It wasn't bright, just faintly shimmering like a weird kind of haze or heat shimmer. Then it started to pulse, like it was breathing light. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up and I felt this weird pressure in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, more like intense confusion. I kept trying to take pictures, but the phone kept freezing for a second every time I tapped the shutter. After a few more moments, it suddenly vanished. Just gone. No sound, no flash, nothing. The sky was empty again, except for the usual stars coming out. I went inside, my heart still pounding, and grabbed my phone to look at the pictures. But none of them were there. I mean, the camera app was open, but when I went to the gallery, it was empty. Not just the photos I took, but everything. Like the whole camera roll was wiped clean. I swiped around, tried restarting the app, but nothing changed. The weirdest part was my battery. It was sitting at 12% when I first noticed the shape. Now it was at 3%. I didn't have any other apps running except some music, and the screen time was minimal. I didn't get any warning about low memory or anything either. I plugged the phone in right away and sat down at the kitchen table. Rufus was pacing, clearly unsettled. I kept looking outside, but nothing else happened. The streetlights flickered a little, and a car drove by, but that was it. I spent the next hour trying to figure out what had just happened. I checked my phone's storage and settings, even restarted it. No sign of the pictures or any system errors. Later, I texted a friend who's into tech stuff, and he said sometimes weird bugs or glitches can cause temporary freezes or drain the battery fast. But that didn't explain the empty gallery or the strange light I saw. I didn't tell my wife about it that night, but the next morning I told her everything. She said everything. She said maybe I was tired or stressed, but I knew what I'd seen. A couple of nights later, I went back out to the porch around the same time. Binoculars in hand this time, hoping to catch whatever that thing was again. I didn't see it, but Rufus kept looking toward the woods and growling softly every once in a while. The air felt heavier, like it was charged with something I couldn't put into words. I don't know if anyone else saw anything that night, and honestly, I'm not even sure what to make of it myself. But whenever I look up now, especially during that same time of day, I keep expecting to see that strange shape or feel that odd pressure again. It's like it left something behind in the air, and I'm still waiting for it to show up. I haven't tried taking pictures again since, not sure if I even want to. I was driving back home late one Saturday night, coming from a friend's place in a part of northern Vermont I didn't know very well. It was just past midnight, cold for early November, and the roads were slick with a thin glaze of freezing rain. My little Subaru's tires hissed softly as I followed the GPS on my phone, which I'd set to avoid highways and stick to back roads. I like the quietness and the scenery of those old winding roads, even if it takes longer. The route the GPS was showing me was supposed to cut through some small towns and back into my neighborhood, a route I hadn't tried before. I don't trust those apps much, but figured it'd be interesting, especially since the gas tank was nearly empty and I wanted to grab some at the next town. After about 20 minutes of driving on what looked like a narrow country road, I noticed something odd. The GPS arrow started spinning slowly, like it was confused. I glanced down and saw the little blue dot jumping around in tight circles. It kept doing that for a full 10 minutes, just spinning like a record stuck on a loop. The map itself was flickering, showing different roads, but none seemed to match where I actually was. I pulled over to the side of the road to check the phone again, and that's when I really noticed how quiet it was. There wasn't a single car passing by, no distant engine sounds, no animals rustling in the woods that pressed right up to the roadside. The air felt heavy and still, like the whole world was holding its breath. I looked up from the screen and tried to see if there were any landmarks. The road stretched ahead and behind me, but there were no signs, no mile markers, no street names. The trees were tall and close, the fog hanging low around their bases, softening the edges of everything. The headlights barely pierced the mist. After the 10 minutes of spinning, suddenly the GPS snapped back like someone hit reset. The arrow jumped straight ahead, and the map zoomed in on a road I'd never seen on any map before. The name was something weird, Moss Hollow Lane. But when I checked my usual maps and even Google, nothing showed up. No roads, no trails, nothing. It was like the road only existed on this one app for just that moment. I started driving again, cautiously following the GPS's instructions, but something felt wrong. The road was narrower, rougher, like it hadn't been maintained in years. Branches brushed the car and patches of ice made the turns slick. The fog thickened and the headlights began to reflect off something strange. A faint shimmer hanging in the air ahead like heat waves or a very thin curtain. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Nola, my dog, who was curled up in the back seat, suddenly perked her ears up and started whining softly. She's usually calm in the car, but looked restless now, staring out the rear window. I thought about turning around, but the GPS kept pushing me forward as if it really wanted me to get where it was leading. I kept noticing other strange things too. The radio wouldn't tune into any station, just static, even when I tried different frequencies. My phone's battery was dropping fast, going from 60 to 40% in what felt like minutes, even though I wasn't using it much. Then I saw lights ahead, low and flickering like lanterns swinging in the wind. But there was no wind. The lights hovered just above the ground near the road's edge, arranged in no particular order. When I blinked, they seemed to shift closer, then further away, but when I looked directly at them again, they were still. Nola started growling softly, her hackles raised. I pulled over again, heart pounding, and reached for my flashlight in the glove box. When I stepped out, the silence was overwhelming. No crickets, no distant cars, just this thick quiet. The fog was so dense I could barely see a few feet past the headlights. I shone the flashlight toward the lights. They weren't lanterns or candles, more like orbs of dim, pulsing glow. They flickered from white to pale blue, almost like they were breathing. I called out softly, "Hello," but only the fog answered back. The orbs shifted direction slowly, almost like they were watching me. I felt a cold sweat run down my back. I hurried back to the car and locked the doors. Once inside, I tried the GPS again. It was normal, showing roads I recognized, with Nola settling down beside me. I drove out the way I'd come, and everything looked familiar again. The fog clearing, the radio picking up stations as normal. At home, I checked all my apps, maps, everything, but there was no sign of Moss Hollow Lane or any strange lights. My phone battery was almost dead, even though I'd only used it sporadically. I haven't gone back that way since. Sometimes when I'm driving late and there's thick fog, I wonder if I'll see those orbs again or that spinning GPS arrow. But I don't want to find out. I work as a park ranger out in the Cascades at this place called Cedar Ridge Preserve. It's not a huge park or anything, but it's mostly untouched forest, a few hiking trails, and a couple of remote campsites. The area is quiet, especially once you get a few miles from the main parking lot. My shifts usually have me checking in on trails, making sure no one's doing anything stupid, that kind of thing. One of my jobs is to monitor a set of motion sensor cameras we've got set up along some of the less traveled trails. The cameras mostly catch wildlife, deer, raccoons, the occasional elk. Every once in a while, hikers or campers show up on them too. The footage is mostly boring. I watch it on a laptop in the little ranger station, usually late in the evening or early morning, when there's less to do out in the field. A few weeks ago, I was looking over the footage from Trail 7, which runs along a ridge and then drops down into a thick grove of old firs. That section's not popular. Hardly anyone takes it because the terrain gets rough and cell service is non-existent. I was scrolling through a batch of video clips from the previous day when something caught my eye. Around 7:15 p.m., just as the sun was setting, the camera caught a figure standing in a clearing about 20 feet from the lens. The strange thing was, the figure wasn't moving at all, not like someone standing still or waiting. It was unnaturally motionless, like a statue. I rewound the clip and watched it a few times. The figure was about 6 feet tall, slender, but there were no clear details. No clothing folds, no hair, nothing that looked familiar. It was smooth, like the surface of a polished stone or plastic. No visible features or texture. The shape was vaguely human, but too smooth and featureless to be a person in a suit or even a jacket. Its arms hung straight down at its sides, and it didn't blink or shift its weight. The clip was only 10 seconds long before the motion sensor stopped recording. I thought maybe it was someone standing still, and the sensor just cut off. So I went back through the previous footage from that camera, and maybe it caught the figure approaching or leaving. There was nothing. No footprints or animals in the frames before or after. The trail leading into the clearing was empty. The usual forest sounds were missing too. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves. The whole 10-second clip had this eerie silence. That night, I went back out to the clearing in person. The spot was real. Just like on the footage, a small patch of open ground surrounded by thick fir trees. The dirt was soft from a recent rain, and I looked around for tracks. There were prints from deer and squirrels, but no human footprints, no tire marks, nothing odd. I kept checking the footage every day after that. 2 more nights later, the camera caught the same figure at almost the same time, standing in roughly the same spot. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift in any way. Then it vanished. When I say vanished, I mean it was there in one frame, and then the very next frame, it was gone. No blur, no fading, no leaving the frame. Just completely disappeared. I checked the frame before and after several times. Nothing showed any sign of movement leading up to the disappearance. The timestamp was steady, no glitching. The thing is, the footage is grainy, low res, no details, just a blurry silhouette. But that smoothness was there, like the figure was something not quite solid. I asked a coworker to look at the clip and see if they noticed anything. He said it looked like a person in a morph suit or some kind of uniform, but that didn't explain the sudden disappearance. At this point, I started feeling weird about the whole thing. It wasn't just the figure, it was the way the forest felt whenever I went near that clearing. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal, like the trees were holding their breath. One evening, I decided to hike the trail about an hour before sunset and set up to watch the spot myself. I brought my dog, Sadie, a border collie mix who's usually calm but alert. We got to the clearing around 6:30 p.m. and sat down on a fallen log nearby. At first, nothing happened. Sadie sniffed around, ears perked, but she didn't bark or act nervous. The forest was still, the kind of still that's heavy, like everything's waiting for something. Then, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I saw it. A shape standing at the far edge of the clearing, exactly where the camera had caught it. The same smooth, featureless silhouette, motionless, blending into the dusk shadows. I didn't move. Sadie tensed beside me, her hackles rising. The figure just stood there, watching. There was no sense of hostility, but something about it felt off. It didn't breathe or blink, didn't shift its stance. After about 5 minutes, the figure simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next, nothing but empty air. No sound, no movement. Sadie let out a low growl, and I stood up, heart pounding. We didn't stay long after that. I've kept an eye on the trail cameras since then. The figure hasn't come back, at least not that I've seen. But sometimes when I'm walking through the woods near that clearing, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. Not by an animal or a person, but something else. Something that's not quite there. I don't know what it was, and I don't expect to. It's just a part of the forest now, a quiet presence I can't explain. I work for a small weather station just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Nothing fancy, mostly gathering data from our weather balloons and sending reports to the university and some local agencies. The station is in a pretty remote spot, on a plateau surrounded by forest and desert. Last September, I was on the late afternoon shift, which means prepping the balloons for release just before dusk, then tracking them as they float up through the atmosphere. That day, I was alone at the station except for my dog, Juno. She's a border collie mix, smart as hell, and usually sticks close by. The weather was clear, a bit chilly, with that dry desert air that feels crisp but doesn't bite like snow. The sun was starting to drop low behind the San Francisco peaks, turning the sky orange and purple. I launched the balloon around 6:10 p.m., like I always do. It's one of those big latex ones, filled with helium, with a small package attached beneath it. The camera and some sensors recording temperature, pressure, humidity, and sending it back to us in real time. The balloon floats up slowly, sometimes going as high as 30 kilometers before bursting and falling back. As usual, I switched on the receiver and the monitor showing the camera's live feed. The image was grainy, black and white, but it gave a decent look at what the balloon was passing over. I expected to see the dark outline of the forest and patches of desert moving beneath it as it rose. But then something caught my eye. At about 5,000 meters altitude, roughly 3 kilometers above the ground, there was this dark shape moving alongside the balloon, matching its altitude and speed almost perfectly. At first, I thought it was a bird, maybe a hawk or an eagle, since they sometimes fly high in those parts. But the shape didn't look right. It was too big, too solid looking, and it didn't flap wings or change direction erratically. It just paced the balloon, staying about 200 meters away horizontally, sliding along the same course. I kept watching. Juno sat nearby, eyes fixed on me, probably sensing my distraction. Minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15. The object never veered off. No change in altitude, no speed change. It just glided beside the balloon, moving steadily over the darkening landscape below. I called my supervisor Mark on the radio, told him what I was seeing, and asked if he could check from the other station a few miles east. He said he wasn't getting any signals or anything unusual on their equipment. I thought maybe it was just something that only showed up on the camera feed. At 20 minutes, the object suddenly accelerated straight up. It moved fast, faster than anything I'd seen in the sky around there. The balloon camera's view went fuzzy as the distance grew. The object disappeared into the upper atmosphere in seconds, too quickly to track beyond a certain point. The balloon kept rising until it popped as expected, and I watched the sensors report data all the way to the burst. Nothing else showed up on the feed after the object vanished. That night, back at the station, I downloaded all the footage and data. When I replayed the video on my laptop, the object was there, pacing right alongside the balloon, clearly visible as a dark oval shape against the sky. No wings, no lights, just moving smoothly. But the weird thing is, the GPS data from the balloon didn't show any disturbances. Nothing on radar scans from nearby stations. I ran the data through every filter and software we have, and nothing explained it. I showed the video to Mark the next day. He shrugged and said maybe it was a rare weather phenomenon, a trick of light or shadow, but neither of us could find a solid explanation. Since then, I've watched every balloon launch closely, hoping to catch something similar. Nothing. Just the usual slow rise, pop, and data dump. Sometimes I think about how precise that thing was, matching the balloon's altitude and speed for so long without making a sound or a visible signature beyond what the camera caught, and how suddenly it shot straight up, faster than anything I've ever seen. Juno still likes to follow me out to the launch site, especially at dusk. She stares into the sky more than usual, like she remembers something I don't. I keep the footage saved, but I don't show it around. Most people at the station think I'm nuts when I mention it, and honestly, I'm not sure what I saw either. I live in a small town called Millfield, out here in Southern Oregon. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and most nights are quiet enough you can hear a pin drop. I work at the hardware store downtown, and my place is a little cabin on the edge of town, right next to the woods. Not a big property or anything, just enough trees between me and the neighbors to feel like I'm out in the wild a bit. It started about 6 weeks ago. I was sitting on my porch one night, about 10 p.m., just unwinding after a long day. The sky was clear, stars out in full force, and the air was cool but still felt like late summer. I noticed this weird light way out near the tree line, hovering just above the woods about a half mile from the house. At first I thought it was maybe a drone or some kind of surveying equipment, but it didn't move the way drones usually do. No blinking lights, no obvious shape, just a dim, steady glow, kind of amber-colored. I kept watching, curious more than anything. It didn't make any noise I could hear, and after about 10 minutes, it slowly drifted off behind the trees and disappeared. That was it. I shrugged and went inside. The next night, same time, same spot. The light was back, same size, same height, same glow. It hovered for about the same amount of time and then vanished. I started paying more attention because it was getting weird. I don't usually notice things like that. I'm pretty grounded, skeptical even. But this thing, whatever it was, had no markings, no blinking lights, nothing that said aircraft or even drone. I asked around town. Some people joked it was the Millfield ghost ship. Others said it was probably just a helicopter or Forest Service drone. But no one admitted to actually seeing it themselves. And if it was a helicopter, it was the quietest one I'd ever heard. One night I brought my dog, Theo, out with me. He's a big, lumbering mutt, part Labrador, part something else, and usually pretty chill. We sat on the porch again, and the light showed up right on schedule. Theo stared at it too, ears up, but he didn't bark or whine, just sat still, watching. Then, after about 15 minutes, the light did something strange. It flickered, like a bulb about to burn out, then shifted color, more bluish, kind of cold and icy, and moved slowly closer to the edge of the trees. It never got closer than 100 yards or so, but I swear it was watching, like it noticed us there and was curious. After that, I started noticing other odd things during the day. The woods felt different, quiet in a way that wasn't normal, like the usual bird noises and rustling leaves were muted or missing entirely. It was subtle, but it made me uncomfortable. One afternoon, I went for a walk along the edge of the forest just to see if I could get a closer look at where the light hovered at night. I found weird impressions in the dirt, not footprints, but shallow, round marks, almost like something heavy had been pressed into the ground and dragged a bit. The circles were about the size of a large manhole cover, spaced evenly in a straight line heading into the trees. No tire tracks, no signs of anything mechanical, just these strange marks that looked out of place. I took pictures and showed them to my friend Lisa, who's into local history and odd happenings. She said maybe old logging equipment left them, but nothing logged in the area recently. I checked with the Forest Service and they had no reports of any unusual vehicles or damage. That night, the light showed up again, same time. It hovered over that line of marks I found, almost like it was connected. I watched from the porch, feeling more nervous than usual. Theo stayed close to me, muscles tense. The light pulsed slowly, not bright enough to illuminate the trees, but enough to cast faint shadows. Then it seemed to split into smaller lights, like sparks flickering on the edges before coming back together. I blinked, and for a second I could have sworn the shape behind the glow was more solid, like a dark oval form, no wings, no rotors, just a smooth silhouette. I kept staring until it faded away and the woods went dark again. Since then, the light's been showing up every night around 10 p.m., sometimes staying longer, sometimes disappearing after 5 minutes. Nothing else seems to change. No sounds, no other lights, no signs of people or vehicles. Just that hovering shape, always at the same altitude, always over those marks in the dirt. I told myself to just ignore it, to not get obsessed, but I can't shake this feeling like I'm being watched. Not by the light exactly, but something in those woods. Theo acts on edge more than usual, sometimes staring off into the trees like he hears something I don't. Last week, I decided to drive out to the spot just after sunset, hoping to catch a better look. I parked at the edge of a logging road and sat in the truck, waiting. The light came on schedule, glowing softly over the marks I'd found. Then, out of nowhere, the truck's radio went dead. Static, then silence. The screen flickered and the dashboard lights dimmed. I tried the ignition. The engine sputtered and died. I was stuck. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the cold night air pressing in. Theo was at my side, low growl rumbling in his throat. I scanned the tree line, heart hammering. The light shifted closer, just beyond the edge of the road, still too far to see clearly. I noticed now the air around it seemed different. Like heat shimmer, but colder, and the shadows twisted strangely. I tried the truck again. No luck. I felt that pull again, like the forest was holding its breath. After a few minutes, the light slowly moved back to its original spot and faded out. The truck started right back up, like nothing happened. I didn't stick around. Drove home fast with Theo on my lap, both of us silent. Now I keep the porch light on every night. The light still comes. I watch it from the window. Theo curled at my feet, both of us waiting. I don't know what it is or why it's there, but I'm pretty sure it's been watching me just as much as I've been watching it. It started the week before, but I only really noticed it that one night. I live in Maple Ridge, a small town in northern Vermont. Nothing fancy, mostly families who've been here for generations, a couple of corner stores, and a single diner that never closes. Quiet, mostly, except for the usual creaks and groans of old houses settling. Around 2:47 a.m., folks started reporting this strange low hum. Not just a hum like a generator or a distant truck idling. It was different. Deep, steady, vibrating through the ground and air. I heard about it from my neighbor, Rita, who called me the next morning. She sounded half freaked out, but also weirdly calm, like she couldn't quite explain what she'd felt. It was like the whole town was humming, she said. You felt it in your bones. I'd been awake a little that night anyway. couldn't sleep for reasons I couldn't pin down. The house felt heavy, like the air was thicker. I remember hearing a faint vibration, almost like when a big rig drives past, but no trucks roll through our street at that hour. The first night, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe some machine somewhere was acting up. Maple Ridge isn't far from a couple of old factories, and sometimes the power lines hum low. But then, on the night, it really got weird. That's when all the car alarms went off at once. It was exactly 2:47 a.m. Like clockwork, every single car alarm on my street blasted off. I was jolted upright in bed, the piercing noise echoing through the cold air. Even the cars parked a few houses down on side streets went off too. I live on a pretty quiet block, maybe 12 houses total, and every one of those alarms started screaming in perfect sync. I threw on my slippers and ran outside, heart pounding, half hoping to see a prank or some idiot running around with a key fob. But no one was there. Just the cold night, the empty street lit by dim porch lights, and that awful noise. I started walking up and down the block, trying to find who triggered it. Every car was locked, no signs of forced entry or anything weird. The alarms all stopped exactly 3 minutes later, just as suddenly as they started. After that, nothing. No sirens, no engines, just silence settling back in. The next day, people were talking about it everywhere. Old man Jensen at the diner swore he'd never heard anything like it in his 70 years living here. A few others said they'd felt that same low hum in the hours before the alarms, like a vibration they couldn't place. I went to bed early that night, telling myself it was probably some kind of electrical glitch or a prank, maybe a power surge. But at 2:47 a.m., that hum came back, low and steady. I laid there, muscles tense, waiting. It was different than the first time, somehow heavier. And then, just like the night before, every car alarm started going off. I sat up, feeling a pressure behind my eyes. I couldn't explain why, but the noise felt like it was pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Harper, my dog, a mutt with a big head and even bigger ears, was pacing, growling softly, his hackles raised. That was the first time I'd ever seen him scared. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside again. The street was deserted except for a few neighbors who were already out, rubbing their eyes, confused, some clutching phones trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The alarms screamed for nearly 5 minutes this time, longer than before. As the alarms finally died down, that hum didn't stop. It lingered, low and unrelenting, and for a few seconds I could swear I heard something else beneath it, like a whisper or a faint rattling sound coming from the woods at the end of the street. Nobody else seemed to hear that part. Just me and Harper, who was staring fixedly toward the tree line, growling again. The next morning, I drove out to the edge of town and walked into those woods. I wanted to see if anything was unusual. The trees were normal, just the usual pine and maple. The dirt path was undisturbed except for some deer tracks and the occasional squirrel. No signs of people, no trash, no weird marks. The weirdness didn't stop with the alarms. Over the next few nights, the hum started creeping in earlier, sometimes at 2:30, sometimes 2:40, never quite consistent. The car alarms still went off on those exact nights, but only once per night, always around the same time. One night I stayed up waiting, feeling too on edge to sleep. Around 2:45 a.m., the hum began, low and steady. I was sitting on the porch steps with Harper when a faint glow appeared near the tree line. It wasn't a flash or a beam, just a dull, pulsing light, blue-white, no clear source. The light flickered for maybe 30 seconds, then vanished. Harper barked once, sharply, and I felt my skin crawl like there was static in the air. The hum stopped immediately after the light disappeared. I told myself it was probably a power line transformer or some kind of industrial thing malfunctioning, but no one could find a source. The utility company said everything was normal. The strange thing was that after that night, the hum didn't return. No more car alarms either. Just silence, like it never happened. But every once in a while, when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can feel that vibration start up again. Just barely, like it's waiting for something. Harper still won't go near the woods past dusk. When I'm outside alone at night, I sometimes catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that glow again. And sometimes, just before I drift off, I hear the faintest low hum in the distance. No one really knows what it was, and neither do I. Just a quiet town, a vibrating night, and those alarms all going off like a warning that no one could quite hear. It happened 2 winters ago when I was still living outside Manchester, Vermont. I rented this little place near Bromley, not up in the mountains, but far enough out that my nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile down a dirt road. I worked remotely, so I kept to myself most days. Only time I really got out was when I jogged the old service trails behind the house. There's a whole network of them, gravel and packed dirt mostly, winding through old-growth forest. You get the occasional deer, sometimes foxes. Never saw another person on those trails, not once. That morning it was cold, maybe mid-20s, and overcast. Snow had fallen a few days earlier, but not much. The trail was frozen solid, enough that my shoes crunched but didn't sink. I left the house a little after 7. I always ran the same loop, up the hill, around the ridgeline, then back down near the old hunting shack with a caved-in roof. I didn't bring my phone, just had my headlamp on, more out of habit than anything. It wasn't dark, just gray, the kind of quiet where the air feels padded. About a mile in, I started getting that weird pressure in my ears. Not painful, just the kind of thing that makes you swallow a few times. I thought maybe it was the altitude, but I'd done this route 100 times and never felt it before. I paused for a second and looked around. Nothing moved. No wind. No birds either. I shook it off and kept going. I rounded a bend, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing just off the trail, maybe 20 feet into the trees. Still as a post. I didn't stop running at first. I slowed, but kept my pace out of instinct, I guess. The thing that caught me was the suit. Full body, silver or metallic. Not bulky like a hazmat suit, more fitted, like something between a wetsuit and a jumpsuit. No markings, just smooth and seamless, like it was made of one piece. It was facing the trail. I didn't see a face. Could have been a helmet, or maybe the material was just reflective. No movement. No reaction. Just standing there, straight-backed, arms at its sides. I passed it in maybe 3 seconds. My brain was still catching up, trying to process what I'd seen. I stopped about 50 feet down the trail, heart hammering, and turned around. It was gone. There was nothing there. Not even the shimmer of the suit through the trees. I walked back to the spot. The snow had patches, like not full coverage, but enough to see footprints. Mine were clear on the trail. Off the path, nothing. No prints, no broken twigs, nothing out of place. I stood there for a good 10 minutes, scanning the woods. It was dead silent, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your head. Eventually, I turned and ran home. I didn't finish the loop. The whole way back, I kept checking over my shoulder. Never saw anything. That night, I tried to write it off. Maybe it was light reflecting off something. Maybe a hunter in some weird gear. But no one hunts that stretch. It's privately owned land, and the guy who leases it to the logging company lives out of state. And even if someone had been out there, they'd have left tracks. There was just no way. The next morning, I went back, same time. I brought my phone and tried to retrace my steps. The woods felt off. I don't know how else to say it. Like the colors were a little duller, like there was static in the air. I walked slow, scanning every spot where I thought the figure had been. And then I heard this sound, faint and high, like someone blowing across the top of a bottle, but constant. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It just sort of hovered in the air, steady as a dial tone. It stopped after maybe 15 seconds. When I got to the bend in the trail, I stepped off into the trees where I thought I'd seen it. Ground was still frozen. No signs anyone had ever stood there. No scuffs. No impressions in the moss. I crouched down and tried to imagine how something could stand there without leaving a trace. I couldn't come up with anything. For a few days, I stayed off the trail, jogged the road instead, but I kept thinking about it. How still it was. How perfectly straight its posture had been. Like it wasn't a person wearing something. It was something that didn't need to move the way people do. A week later, I gave in and went back to the loop. Middle of the day, full sun, no clouds. It felt more normal. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. But as I came back down near the hunting shack, I noticed a sapling that had been bent at the base. Like something heavy had stepped on it. Fresh bend, sap still wet. It was about the same height as where I'd seen the figure. I took a photo, but it just looks like a broken twig in a patch of snow. Could have been a deer, I guess. After that, I started running later in the day when the sun was higher. Nothing weird happened again, but I always got nervous near that stretch, especially when it was quiet. The woods out there don't carry sound well. It's like things just get swallowed up. I moved out that spring, not because of that, just job stuff. But I never told anyone about the thing I saw, not even my sister. I've played it back in my head 100 times. I can picture the exact shape of it, the way the light slid across the suit. How it didn't even flinch as I ran past, like it wasn't surprised to see me, like it had been standing there a long time, waiting. I was about halfway through my usual Saturday morning routine, coffee brewing, dog circling my feet, the kind of quiet hum that settles into a small suburban house, when my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, which wasn't unusual since I get a fair share of wrong calls or spam. I figured it would be another robotic sales pitch, so I almost didn't bother listening. But something made me check it right then. The message was just static and clicking noises, nothing else. I sat there staring at the phone, confused. I hit replay, volume up, but it was just the same low static, mixed with sharp clicking sounds spaced out in an odd rhythm. It wasn't like any interference I'd ever heard before. Usually static is just a constant hiss or crackle, but this was deliberate, like someone was tapping something out. I'm a software engineer by trade and I like puzzles, so I saved the voicemail and started playing around with the audio file. I pulled it up on a spectrogram, basically a visual of the frequencies over time. The clicks showed up as these repeating spikes, almost like Morse code. I didn't know Morse, but it looked patterned, too neat to be random. Curious, I ran it through a frequency analyzer and did some trial decoding. After a couple hours of messing with it, I pulled out a sequence that kept repeating itself. When I cross-checked the numbers, they looked suspiciously like coordinates, not just random numbers, specific latitude and longitude points. The coordinates pointed somewhere in the northern Rockies near Glacier National Park. I didn't know anyone up there. No reason for someone to send me coordinates like that, especially hidden in static. I called my friend Nate, who's a radio hobbyist, to see if he could make sense of it. He told me it was definitely intentional, too precise to be interference or malfunction. We compared notes, and the pattern repeated exactly every 20 seconds for the full minute of the voicemail. That evening, I tried calling back the number, but it went straight to voicemail, then disconnected. Nothing came up in any online searches either. It was like the number didn't belong to anyone. The next day, I kept thinking about those coordinates. I pulled up satellite images, looked at maps. The area was remote forest, rugged mountains, no towns nearby, just a few hiking trails and some old ranger stations. Later that afternoon, I got a text from the same number. Just a single line, "Look up." I looked outside. It was just past dusk and the sky was a deep blue fading into night. I live near a park with a clear view of the horizon. I glanced up and saw a cluster of bright lights, not too high but steady, moving slowly across the sky. They weren't airplanes or drones. No blinking navigation lights, just a silent, glowing formation shifting with a smooth rhythm. I blinked and looked away for a second, then back. The lights were gone. I figured maybe I was just tired or imagining things. But the next morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. It was in neat block letters. "Coordinates are a start." I didn't recognize the handwriting. No signature. Over the next few days, I kept getting more voicemails from that number, all static and clicking, with slight variations. Each one decoded to different coordinates, all scattered through the northern Rockies, near wilderness, lakes, and old mining towns. I started driving out, following the points on the map during my free time. Each spot was quiet, deserted, mostly forest or rocky outcrops. I didn't find anything unusual on the ground. No markings, no equipment, no signs anyone had been there recently. One evening, after a long day of driving and hiking, I sat on a rock overlooking a small lake. The air was cold, the wind dead calm, and the forest around me was still. I turned my phone on to check for more messages, and there was another voicemail waiting. Static and clicks again. This time, after the usual pattern, there was a soft hiss, like air leaking out, followed by a faint hum that reminded me of a tuning fork. I sat there, feeling the dark settle around me, listening closely. The woods were silent except for distant water dripping from pine needles. I felt watched. I scanned the tree line with a flashlight, but saw nothing. After a while, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Chester, my dog who'd been lying quietly beside me, suddenly perked up and started growling low. I shone the flashlight into the trees again, catching a glimpse of something reflecting the beam. It was quick, no shape to it, more like a flash of metal or glass. I called Chester back to my side. The feeling of being watched didn't go away, but there was no sound, no movement, just silence and shadows. I packed up and drove home. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The voicemails kept coming, always the clicks and static, with coordinates pointing to places I was pretty sure I'd already checked. The next day, I noticed my phone battery was draining faster than usual. I checked the settings. No apps running in the background, no unusual data usage. I reset the phone, but it didn't help. Later that night, the power flickered twice, and my Wi-Fi cut out for a few minutes. I looked out the window and saw the same cluster of lights from before, low in the sky again. They hovered there for maybe a minute before fading away. No sound, no trail. I'm still not sure what to make of all this. The voicemails stopped after a week, but I still find myself staring at those coordinates, wondering if I missed something or if whatever was sending them is still out there, watching. Chester won't go near the woods anymore, and neither will I. I haven't gotten any new messages since, but every now and then, when I'm out late on the porch, I catch a faint clicking noise on the wind. I don't know who's sending those messages or why, but the coordinates and the lights, they feel connected somehow. I keep waiting for the next step. I was driving through southwestern Kansas on a calm September afternoon, chasing a weather report that called for isolated thunderstorms near the Flint Hills. The sky was mostly clear, just a few thin clouds scattered across the blue. Nothing looked threatening at all. I had my rig set up, the usual radar, anemometer, electromagnetic sensors, all hooked into the laptop on my passenger seat. My dog Hobbs, a lanky Australian Shepherd mix, was curled up in the back, mostly asleep. I've been chasing storms for years, always ready for sudden changes. But that day was weird, right from the start. Around 3:15 p.m., while I was cruising on a 2-lane highway near a small town called Eureka, my instruments suddenly flickered. The usual hum from the EM sensor shot up like a radio went haywire. Static buzzed through the speakers connected to the laptop, and the display went haywire with erratic spikes. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a sensor malfunction, maybe interference from power lines or something electronic in the area. But there wasn't a power line for miles, and the laptop wasn't connected to any cell signal. I double-checked that out of habit. Then the radar picked up a dark oval shape, slowly moving just below the lowest layer of clouds. The thing is, the clouds were high and thin, with a clear sky around them. The object didn't have a radar signature that matched any known aircraft. It wasn't on any flight tracking app I had running either. I stopped the truck on the shoulder and stepped out, with Hobbs trotting beside me, ears perked and alert. The air felt heavier than usual, but the wind was still. I scanned the sky, expecting to see a plane or a weather balloon, something normal, but there was nothing up there, just the light clouds drifting lazily. I kept looking toward the horizon where the radar had indicated the oval was. For a few minutes, it didn't show up visually. Then, almost at the edge of the clouds, I noticed a dark shadow drifting slowly across the fields. It wasn't like a cloud or a bird, it was too solid, too defined. The shape was perfectly oval, and it moved silently and smoothly, like it was gliding just under the clouds. Hobbs suddenly growled low in his throat and stayed close. I didn't blame him. Something about the way that shadow hovered felt wrong. It didn't move with the wind. It moved against it, controlled and deliberate. I called the local sheriff's office just to ask if they'd gotten any calls about strange aircraft or anything unusual. The dispatcher said nothing had been reported and there were no notices for unusual flights or military exercises in the area. The electromagnetic spikes kept happening every few minutes. My laptop was having trouble processing the data. The static noise from the speakers became a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat. It was oddly steady, and it seemed to sync up with the movement of that shadow below the clouds. At one point, I decided to try taking pictures with my phone. I raised the camera toward the shadow, but the screen flickered and froze for a second. When it came back, the shadow was gone. The clouds looked normal again, and the sky was empty. I walked back to my truck, feeling a weird kind of pressure on my chest, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. Hobbs stayed glued to my side, looking up and growling softly every so often. I tried to shake it off and got back on the road, but the instruments didn't go back to normal. The EM interference stayed, though it shifted in intensity. It felt like whatever was causing it was still nearby, just out of sight. That evening, I found a diner in a small town and parked outside, still watching the sky. The interference finally faded around sunset and my equipment returned to normal. Hobbs settled down in the back seat, exhausted from the tension. I kept scanning the horizon with my binoculars, but there was nothing strange in the fading light. Just the normal twinkling of distant farms and the occasional car driving by on empty roads. I got back home late that night. Even after the whole day of weird readings and that dark shadow, everything felt normal inside my apartment. But I kept thinking about that silent oval shape drifting beneath the clouds and how it vanished without a trace whenever I tried to focus on it. I don't know what it was or why it showed up when there was no storm to chase, but I keep checking the sky whenever I can. Hobbs seems to watch it too, a little more wary than usual. And that's the story. It was Labor Day weekend, 2 years ago. Me, Colin, Jaya, and Brett had rented this little A-frame cabin outside of Leavenworth up in the Cascades. Kind of a last-minute thing just to get out of the city for a few days. The place was small. No TV, no cell service, no Wi-Fi, just a wood stove, a deck, and a view of the tree line. Perfect, honestly. We'd brought board games, beer, and a bunch of groceries, planning to hike during the day and just hang out at night. The third night, Sunday, we stayed up late sitting around the fire pit behind the cabin. We'd run out of firewood around 10, but nobody wanted to go inside yet, so we just sat in the dark. No moon that night, just a mess of stars overhead. The sky was clear, like I don't think I'd seen that many stars at once in my entire life. We were all in camping chairs, me and Colin on one side of the fire ring, Brett and Jaya across from us. Someone put on a playlist off a downloaded Spotify queue, something mellow, and we just sat there drinking hard cider and pointing out constellations we thought we recognized. Real quiet. Maybe 2 hours went by like that. Around midnight, Colin said something like, "What's that?" and pointed up over the trees to the south. At first I thought he meant a plane, but when I looked I saw this bright white light, way up. Too high and still for a drone, too slow for a plane. It was moving. Yeah, but it was this slow, steady glide. Not blinking, not making any noise, and totally smooth. We all started watching it. It didn't change speed or altitude, just kept drifting northward. I figured it was some kind of satellite, but Jaya said it was too bright and too low for that. I remember she said, "It's way below the stars," and she was right. It passed in front of a few, not behind. The four of us watched it for maybe 30 seconds, maybe more. Long enough for the conversation to die down completely. Then the light stopped, midair, just froze in place like someone pressed pause. No stutter, no flicker, it just stopped. Nobody said anything right away. I think we all expected it to resume like a trick of perspective or something, but then it started getting brighter, not fast, slowly, like a dimmer switch turning up. It went from star-level brightness to something more like a headlight in fog, and then this part I still don't get. It split, not exploded, not broke apart, just separated. The single bright light became 3 smaller lights, all equal in size and brightness, spaced evenly apart like a perfect triangle. Not a huge triangle, but wide enough to notice. They didn't fall or scatter, just hovered there, totally still. That was the first time I remember feeling uneasy. The way they stayed in sync, no drift, no wobble, it didn't look natural. Brett leaned forward and said, "That's not right." And I remember nodding but not looking away. It was like the lights were aware of each other, like they were holding a formation. A perfect one. Then they moved. Together, straight upward, just a few degrees, and then to the left. Still in triangle form, still at the same speed. Then they stopped. Then they did it again. Up, stop, right, stop, down, stop. Almost like they were mapping something. I looked at Jaya. She was gripping the arms of her chair, not blinking. Colin had set his sighter on the ground without realizing it. Brett had his phone out, but we didn't have signal and the camera couldn't focus in the dark. He got one blurry shot, just a smear of light. That's all we have. The lights kept shifting, maybe 5 or 6 times, always together. Not random. Definitely not random. Then, and I swear this happened exactly like this, they moved upward, paused, and then blinked. One single pulse of light, almost like a camera flash. And then they were gone. Gone like, not flown off, just gone. Like a light turned off, but the sky was totally clear. No clouds, no cover. One blink, and they vanished. We all kind of looked at each other like, did that happen? Colin stood up and started pacing. Brett just kept checking his phone, even though it was obvious he wasn't getting signal. Jaya finally said, "Okay, that's enough for me," and went back inside. I followed her in after a minute. Didn't say much. None of us did, really. It wasn't like in movies where everyone freaks out. We just kind of shut down. Brett and Colin stayed out there another 10 minutes maybe, and then came in too. Nobody brought it up again until the next morning. We went through all the usual stuff: satellites, drones, military aircraft, weather balloons, but none of it made sense. Satellites don't hover or blink out. Drones don't fly that high and stay in triangle formations without sound. It was too precise. And that light, I can still picture it. White, almost clinical, but soft at the edges. Not like a beam, just a presence. We checked the news that day, thinking maybe other people had seen something, but there was nothing. Not even a weather anomaly. Just normal reports. Clear skies, light wind. We didn't stay another night. Packed up that afternoon and drove back to Seattle early. Nobody said why, but we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever that was, it wasn't something we wanted to be near again. The trail where it happened is out near the edge of the national forest I was assigned to patrol that summer. It's not a busy spot, mostly just hikers who know the area well, and even then, it's a quiet path that runs through thick pine and spruce. I'd been on that trail hundreds of times, but that afternoon felt different from the start. I was doing my usual rounds, checking for fallen branches, signs of erosion, anything that might need fixing or reporting. The air was cool but still for July, and the sun was dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the path. I remember hearing the usual background noise, leaves rustling, distant water from a creek, bugs buzzing, but something about the birds was off. Normally, there'd be sparrows or chickadees flitting between branches, their chirping filling the woods, especially in the early evening. But here, near the middle of the trail, the singing just stopped. I thought maybe they'd gone quiet because I was there, but that seemed unlikely. I stood still for a moment, trying to hear anything besides the rustling wind. Nothing. No chirps, no caws, not even a single flutter of wings. Just silence. That was the first weird thing. Then, faintly, I started hearing this tapping sound. It was rhythmic and steady, almost like someone was drumming their fingers on wood, but there was no one else on the trail. The sound didn't seem to be coming from the ground or the trees near me. It echoed from deeper inside the forest, just out of sight beyond the underbrush. I glanced around, expecting to see a woodpecker or maybe some branches knocking together, but the trees looked still. The wind had dropped completely, which made the tapping even more noticeable. It wasn't random or irregular. It was deliberate, slow, and consistent. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. I started walking again, aiming to get through that section faster than usual. The tapping followed me, steady but not getting closer or further away, just keeping pace like a metronome behind the rustling leaves. After a few minutes, I stopped near a small clearing to check the trail markers. The forest around me felt heavy, like the air had weight. No birds, no insects, just that tapping, which now seemed louder, clearer. I crouched down and scanned the area. No footprints or signs of animals, and no visible source of the noise. I called out a few times, thinking maybe someone else was hiking nearby and drumming on a tree as a joke. No answer. The silence in the forest was thick, like it swallowed any sound that wasn't that tapping. The whole scene was unnerving, but not exactly terrifying. More like wrong. I wanted to get out of there fast. When I turned to leave, I noticed the trail looked different. The dirt was packed harder than usual, almost like it had been pressed down by something big. But the weirdest part was there were no footprints at all. Usually, even on quiet trails, you'll see some signs of hikers, bikes, or animals. Here, nothing. No tracks leading into the clearing, no tracks leaving. I checked the surrounding ground carefully. No disturbed leaves, no broken twigs, no flattened grass. It was as if whatever made the tapping was moving without touching the forest floor. That thought stuck with me as I hurried back down the path. The tapping stayed behind me the whole time, steady and clear. But when I stopped to look back, there was no sign of anything, just dense trees and shadows. By the time I got back to the ranger station, my skin felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. I told my partner about the silence and the tapping, but he just shrugged and said, maybe it was some kind of animal behavior I hadn't seen before, or just my imagination. That night, I tried to go to sleep, but the tapping kept running through my head. When I closed my eyes, I could almost hear it tapping somewhere far away, echoing through the dark. I went back to that trail the next day, hoping to find an explanation, but the section was normal. Birds singing, bugs buzzing, the usual sounds of the forest. No silence, no tapping, no strange, hard-packed dirt without tracks. I don't know what I heard or saw that day, but I've never come across anything like it since. It wasn't a dream or a trick of the light. Something was there. Quiet and steady, just beyond sight, and it wasn't supposed to be. I worked the graveyard shift at a small convenience store on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just the usual late-night stuff, restocking shelves, watching the cameras, and hoping the quiet lasts. This happened a few months ago, maybe late spring, when the days start getting longer but the nights still feel cold and empty. It was just past midnight when I first noticed the light. I was standing by the front window, wiping down the counter, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught something blinking behind the tree line that borders the parking lot. It was a single red light, nothing like the usual car brake lights or street lamps. The weird thing was how steady it was, blinking on and off in the exact same spot every 10 seconds. I counted. 1 blink, pause, blink, pause, like a metronome. At first, I thought it was a car parked just beyond the trees, maybe someone fishing or camping nearby, but the parking lot was empty and the road out front was dead. I stepped outside, walked over to the edge of the lot where the trees started, trying to see through the branches, but the light was too deep in the woods to spot anything else. No sounds, no movement, just the red blinking light, glowing faintly between the trunks. I went back inside, thinking maybe it was some kind of hunting light or someone using a flashlight to signal. But the timing was too exact, too deliberate. It didn't feel random. The clock ticked on. Every 10 seconds, the light blinked again. I started timing it with my phone. 10 seconds, 10 seconds, always the same. It didn't speed up or slow down. It stayed perfectly regular for nearly half an hour. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. I kept watching it from behind the counter, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and something else. Something tight, like my chest was getting squeezed. I tried calling my friend on a break, but no answer. Texted her a quick message about the blinking light, but didn't get a reply. Then, suddenly, the light moved. It didn't slide sideways or jump around like I expected. It shot straight up. Like someone flicked a switch, it started rising vertically, fast, cutting through the dark tree line. I saw it clearly against the night sky, climbing higher and higher until it vanished somewhere above the clouds. There was no noise, no engine hum, no crackle or buzz. Just that red dot rising like a flare, getting smaller and smaller, then gone. I stood frozen for a minute, not sure if I'd imagined it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked back toward the trees, but the light was definitely gone. No blinking, no flicker, no sign it had ever been there. I thought about calling the cops or someone, but who would believe me? A blinking red light that moves straight up and disappears? Sounds like something from a movie. I clocked back in, trying to focus on my work, but the whole night felt off. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting the light to come back or see something moving in the shadows. A couple of hours later, near closing time, I heard it, soft footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate. I looked up from the counter, but the lot was empty. No cars, no people. I stepped outside, heart pounding a little, and scanned the edge of the trees. Nothing. Just dark shapes and the rustle of wind through leaves. I didn't want to stick around anymore. Grabbed my things, locked the doors early, and got in my car. As I backed out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought I saw a faint red glow near the tree line, but when I looked again, it was gone. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. It was my friend finally replying, "Sorry, fell asleep. Everything okay?" I wanted to tell her, but the words felt strange coming out loud. I just said yeah. When I got home, I double-checked the security footage from the store. The cameras didn't pick up the light at all. Not a flicker. The timestamp showed the usual empty parking lot, nothing unusual. That was the weirdest part. If it was real, why didn't the cameras see it? I still think about that light sometimes. The steady blinking, the way it rose silently and vanished. I don't know what it was, or why I was the only one who saw it that night, but I know it was there, somewhere just beyond the trees, watching. I was working the night shift at the county sheriff's office, driving patrol out in the back roads where the trees crowd close to the dirt, and the sky's just black with stars. It was just past midnight when dispatch buzzed me about a car spotted on an old logging road off Highway 47, about 10 miles from the nearest town. The report was vague: car running, headlights on, nobody around. Probably someone stranded or playing dumb, but it was the kind of call you still have to check. I headed out, my cruiser's tires kicking up dust as I peeled off the paved highway and onto the rutted dirt track. The place was dark except for the headlights of the car, a silver sedan sitting halfway off the road, engines still humming, lights bright against the shadows. I killed my cruiser's lights and pulled up behind it, staying a few feet back. I called it in. Unit 42, I've got the car, no driver in sight. The radio crackled back. Copy that. Any sign of the driver? Nope, nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was cool, maybe mid-50s, but dry. The only sounds were the distant buzz of insects and the steady hum of the car's engine. No birds or anything, which felt off for this time of year. I walked around the car slow, shining my light through the windows. The interior was empty. No bags, no jackets left behind, just the usual clutter you'd expect in a daily driver. Old receipts, a half-empty water bottle, a pack of gum crushed between the seats. Keys were still in the ignition. That's when I noticed the grass about 20 feet in front of the car. It was flattened in a series of perfect circles, like someone pressed down there but didn't just sit or lie down. The circles were maybe 2 or 3 feet across, perfectly round and scorched brown at the edges, like something hot touched the grass and burned it in those shapes. I scanned the area with my flashlight. The trees around were tall pines, casting long, dark shadows. The dirt road curved off to the left and disappeared into thick woods. I couldn't see footprints near the car or the circles, which was weird since the ground was dry but soft enough to hold prints. I called dispatch again. Dispatch, this is Unit 42. No sign of the driver. There's a cluster of burnt circular marks in the grass near the vehicle. No footprints or tracks leading away. Static on the other end. Understood, Unit 42. Back up en route. I sighed, wiped sweat off my forehead, even though it wasn't hot. The radio went quiet again, except for the faint hum of the car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong about this scene, like the usual reasons someone would abandon a car. Accident, breakdown, medical emergency, didn't fit. No damage on the car, no evidence the driver was hurt or ran off in a hurry. I stayed near the passenger side, shining my flashlight on the circles. They looked like they were burned from the top down, not just pressed. The grass was crispy, but the soil underneath didn't look disturbed. If someone had been standing there holding something hot, you'd think there would be footprints or some other sign. But nothing. I pulled out my phone to snap pictures. As I raised it, I caught movement in the tree line just beyond the road. A shadow flickered between the trunks, too quick to make out, but definitely there. I dropped my phone to my side and trained the flashlight on the spot. Nothing, just trees and the dark. I tried to tell myself it was a deer or some small animal, but the way it moved was too deliberate for a wild animal. I felt my chest tighten. I wasn't one to spook easily, but out here with just my flashlight and that humming car, it felt like I was being watched. I took a step back toward the cruiser, thinking maybe I'd radio in again or wait for backup with the engine running. But then I heard it, a low vibration, like a distant engine, but not mechanical. It didn't come from the road or the woods. It was just there, underneath everything, almost under the ground. The car's engine sputtered once, then died. The headlights flickered, then went out. Total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely piercing the black. I looked back at the car. The circles in the grass were still there, but now the edges looked like they were glowing faintly, like embers, but cooler with a bluish tint. I called out into the dark. "Hello? You out here?" No answer. Only the quiet hum that had been there before, but now it seemed louder, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I radioed dispatch again. "Unit 42, car just shut off on its own. No response on the radio or phone signal is spotty. Backup ETA 10 minutes. Static again. Then silence." I moved back to the cruiser, double-checked my equipment. My phone showed no signal. I kept trying to call out, but nothing went through. Minutes passed. The humming faded, the faint glow from the circles disappeared. The air felt thick, like it had weight. My fingers started tingling, and my breathing felt heavier than it should. I told myself to stay calm. I was just a guy on patrol. Cars break down. People abandon vehicles for dumb reasons. But the absence of footprints, the burnt circles, the car shutting off all at once, it didn't make sense. I noticed the headlights on the cruiser were dimming too, like the batteries were draining faster than normal. I turned them off and sat inside, locked the doors. I kept scanning the road and tree line, watching for anything moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes, the backup finally rolled up, headlights cutting through the dark. They called my radio. "Unit 43 here. We're on scene. What's the situation?" I explained everything. They looked at the circles in the grass and shook their heads, just as puzzled. One of the deputies called the fire department to check for any chemical or electrical burns. Nothing showed up. We searched the area thoroughly, but found no sign of the driver or any other disturbance. No footprints, no tracks, no campsites. Just that car and those weird scorched circles. We towed the car back to the station, and I stayed with it overnight, watching the footage from my cruiser's dash cam. The recording stopped a few minutes after I arrived at the car. The video flickered, then went to static. I rewound and watched again. Right before it cut out, the camera captured a flash of bright white light from the direction of the circles. I never heard anything else about the driver or that car. The report got filed under abandoned vehicle. I asked around, but nobody reported a missing person matching a description. The whole thing left me with this nagging feeling, like something was there that I couldn't see, like I was being watched the entire time, but by something that didn't want to be found. I still drive that road sometimes, especially late at night, and I swear I catch glimpses of light flickering between the trees. Nothing solid, just shadows and flashes. The circles in the grass never came back, but sometimes I wonder if they're still there, hidden beneath the weeds. I don't know what it was that night. All I know is it wasn't just a car left running with no driver. There was something else out there, something I couldn't explain. And that's the part that stays with me. I was driving home from work one night, about 11:30 p.m. The roads were quiet, just a few cars here and there. I usually keep my phone on silent while I'm driving, but when I pulled into the driveway and grabbed my phone, I saw I had a new voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but my voicemail list showed it was from my own number. That's when things started to feel weird. I hit play, and it was me. My voice, panicked and confused, talking about a light that won't let me move. I don't remember leaving that message at all. And the weirdest part? There was no call in my recent calls list. No outgoing or incoming call logged, just the voicemail. I sat there on my couch listening again, and it was definitely me. Same voice, same tone, but I had zero memory of it. The message started with me saying, "I don't know what this is. It's just a light. It's right there, and I can't move. It won't let me move. I'm scared. I don't know what to do." The way I said it, you could hear how rattled I was. Then it cut out. That was it. I kept replaying it, trying to remember if I'd been messing with my phone or if maybe I'd recorded it accidentally. But nothing clicked. I don't talk in my sleep, and I never make calls or messages without meaning to. Plus, like I said, no call records anywhere. The night before, I remembered, I had gone out for a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. or so, and the streetlights were dim and sparse. I don't usually do that, but I wanted some fresh air. I never take my phone on those walks, usually leave it inside. But something about that night felt off. When I got to the corner by the park, I noticed this faint glow way off in the distance, near the tree line. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It wasn't a street lamp, and there were no cars or houses with their lights on there. The glow was pale and steady, almost bluish white. It didn't flicker or move, just hung there, about the height of a tree. I figured it might be some kind of flashlight or someone's phone light, but I couldn't see anyone around. The park was empty. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but the light seemed to follow me. Not by moving closer or anything obvious, but if I stopped and looked, it was always in roughly the same spot relative to me. I felt my skin crawl like I was being watched. But there was no one there. No footsteps. No sounds. Nothing. Just that light. I hurried back home, doors locked behind me. I told myself it was just some guy messing with a drone or some other prank, but it didn't feel right. That was the last thing I remembered clearly until I heard that voicemail. After hearing the message, I went through my phone settings and checked the audio logs, permissions, anything that might explain how the recording happened, but everything looked normal. No apps were active that could have done it, and I had no reason to record myself like that. I also thought maybe someone hacked my phone and left the message, but that made less sense the more I thought about it. Why record a panicked message in my own voice if they could just call or text me? The next day, I kept thinking about the light and the voicemail. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see that same glow in the distance. At work, I was distracted, almost convinced people were watching me, or that something was lurking just out of sight. I kept checking my phone for more strange messages or calls, but nothing. I told a close friend about the voicemail, played it for him, and he looked as confused as I felt. He said maybe it was some kind of glitch or a virus, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before. I tried to put it behind me, but over the next few days, little things kept piling up. Lights in my house flickered randomly, the TV would turn on by itself for a second, and I could swear I heard a faint humming noise outside my window late at night. I checked outside every time, but never saw anything. One night, I decided to record my own voice, talking about the experience, trying to make sense of it all. When I played it back, the recording had a faint background noise I didn't notice while recording, a low, steady hum, almost like a vibration. It reminded me of the weird light from the park, the one that wouldn't let me move. I went back to the park to see if I could find the light again, but the spot was dark and quiet. No glow, no hum, nothing. Just the usual streetlights and the rustling of trees. I don't know what happened that night or how that voicemail got on my phone. All I know is I heard myself say things I don't remember feeling about something I don't remember seeing. And that light, it's like it left a mark on me even if I can't explain it. Since then, I keep my phone close and try not to walk alone at night. The voicemail's still there. Sometimes I play it just to remind myself that what happened wasn't all in my head. But I'm not sure I want to hear it too often. I woke up around 4:30 in the morning and instantly knew something was off. Not in a big, dramatic way, just a weird feeling, like my brain was already halfway awake before my eyes opened. The air felt too cool for how I remembered the night being, and there was this faint smell, kind of earthy. Not bad, just out of place. like wet grass and dry dirt. I sat up and immediately saw that the window across from the bed was wide open. I never sleep with it open. It's one of those older wooden frame types that sticks unless you really force it, and I keep it locked out of habit. The screen was pushed up too, like someone had lifted both. The rug under it was wet, just in a rectangular patch, maybe 2 feet wide. Not soaked, but definitely damp, enough that the color was darker. And in the middle of the wet spot, there was this spiral of little brown leaves. That part didn't make sense. The leaves were dry, curled at the edges, and they'd been laid out in this neat swirl that almost touched the baseboard. I didn't count them, but there were probably a few dozen. They weren't scattered either. They were arranged carefully, close together, not overlapping. The kind of thing you'd have to sit down and do on purpose. I stood up, walked over, and just stared at them for a while. My first thought was raccoons or something, but there was no dirt, no scratches, no sign of anything climbing through. And the window wasn't broken, it had just been opened. I checked it again to be sure, and yeah, the lock was unlatched. Cleanly. I definitely locked it before bed. I remember doing it because I'd had the window cracked earlier while I was cleaning, and I made a point of shutting it before turning off the lights. I touched one of the leaves with my toe. It didn't fall apart or crumble, just sort of skated across the rug like it hadn't absorbed any of the moisture. That bugged me. The carpet around it was damp, but the leaves were totally dry. I checked my phone, half expecting it to be dead, but it was fine. No missed calls, no texts. I went around the house and looked at the front door, the back door, every other window, all locked. No sign anyone had come in. Nothing stolen, nothing moved. Just that one window and the leaves. I didn't go back to sleep. I made coffee even though I didn't want it, and just sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light on, trying to figure out how it could have happened. I didn't have pets. I lived alone. I didn't sleepwalk. And the spiral, something about that shape felt intentional. Too neat. Too specific. Later that morning, once it was fully light, I went outside to check the grass under that window. There weren't any footprints. The dew was undisturbed, like no one had walked across it. I even tried stepping across myself to see what kind of prints it would leave, and mine were obvious. Flattened grass, water pushed aside. There was nothing like that around the base of the wall. I took a photo of the spiral before I cleaned it up. It didn't look as weird in the picture. Kind of small, easy to dismiss, but standing there in person, it felt wrong. I used a dustpan to scoop up the leaves and toss them outside, then blotted the carpet dry with towels. It took a while to stop noticing that smell. That night I double-checked everything, locked every door and window, pulled the curtains tight. I even stuck a broom handle in the track of the sliding door just to be extra sure. I told myself it had to be something explainable. I even looked up things like prank neighbors, raccoon behavior, weird insects. Nothing made sense. I managed to sleep okay the next night. No noises, no dreams. But when I woke up the next morning, there was a single leaf on the floor at the foot of the bed. Same kind, dry, brown, curled at the edges. Nothing else. Just that one. That shook me more than the spiral somehow. It felt personal. I didn't tell anyone about it. What was I going to say? I live in a quiet neighborhood, small town, low crime. I hadn't had visitors in weeks. I thought about setting up a camera, but part of me didn't want to. I was scared of what I might see. Instead, I started sleeping with the bedroom door shut and a chair pushed up against it. I kept my phone on the nightstand with the flashlight app open. I made myself stay up late reading, watching TV on my laptop, anything to avoid turning off the light too early. Nothing happened for a couple of days. Then I woke up around 3 a.m., not to a sound, but to a feeling, like being stared at. I rolled over and stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying not to look at the window. Eventually, I sat up. The curtains were closed. I always kept them closed now, but they were moving just a little, not like wind from a vent or breeze. This was slower, like they were being pushed from behind, then let go. I sat there watching, barely breathing. After a while, they went still. I didn't open them. I didn't even get out of bed. I pulled the blankets up to my chest and waited for the sky outside to get lighter. Around 6, I finally turned the light on. Checked the floor. Nothing there. Window locked. Curtains looked normal. That day, I drove out to a hardware store in the next town over and bought 2 window alarms, one for the bedroom and one for the guest room just in case. They were cheap, the kind with a little magnetic sensor that beeps if the seal breaks. I tested them and everything. That night, I slept better. Knowing they were there helped, even if it was just psychological. I kept the phone on and the flashlight ready, just in case. 2 more nights went by, no issues. I started to feel like maybe it had just been a weird one-time thing. Maybe I'd left the window cracked more than I thought. Maybe the spiral was a trick of the wind. I knew I didn't believe that, but it helped me get through the week. On the 3rd night after I installed the alarms, I woke up again around 4. This time, it was silent. Not in a peaceful way, more like the kind of silence you only notice because it's too quiet. No crickets, no fridge hum, nothing. I sat up and listened. Then the alarm chirped, just one soft beep, like the warning tone before a full trigger. It came from the bedroom window, but it didn't go off completely. Just that half-second blip, like something almost broke the seal and then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the little red light on the sensor. It wasn't blinking. It looked fine. The curtain moved again. Just once, like someone pressing a hand against it from the outside and letting it fall. I reached for the flashlight but didn't turn it on. I sat there gripping it, waiting. Nothing else happened. I turned on the light when the sun came up. Checked the window. Locked. No marks. Alarms still in place. I looked down and saw a short line of leaves under the radiator. Not in a spiral this time, just a row. 5 of them, all pointing the same direction. I picked them up, one by one, and threw them out the back door. Then I turned off the alarm, shut the window, and nailed the damn thing shut. I haven't opened it since. The power went out around 6:30 that evening. Not all at once either. First the lights flickered a few times, then dimmed, then everything just kind of shut off. No click, no surge, just gone. My wife figured it was the wind. It had been picking up all afternoon and we were used to occasional outages up at the cabin. It's not far from Ashland, but far enough into the woods that the grid can get spotty, especially when the weather gets weird. We weren't that concerned at first. We had flashlights, a battery lantern, and one of those little hand crank radios that also charges phones. The kids thought it was kind of fun. Camping mode, basically. I lit the wood stove, made sure we had enough water set aside just in case, and settled in to wait it out. Around 7:15, my phone lost signal. Not just data, but the bars dropped to 0. That was a little unusual, since we normally got at least 1 or 2 bars even when the weather sucked. I stepped outside to check, holding the phone up like an idiot. Nothing. Just no service. My wife's phone was the same. The kids were watching me through the window, thinking I was being dramatic. I went back in, grabbed the handheld GPS from the gear cabinet. It's one of those basic Garmin models, pretty reliable. We usually used it for hiking. I figured maybe I could get a better sense of what was going on, maybe pick up some coordinates and try to gauge whether it was a local grid issue or something broader. The GPS wouldn't lock. It turned on fine, battery was full, but it just sat on the loading screen. Acquiring satellites. That part can take a minute in dense woods, but we weren't deep in the trees. The cabin sits in a clearing about half an acre wide. I gave it 5 minutes. Still nothing. No satellites found. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and noticed the compass needle spinning. We keep a few old-school magnetic compasses in the cabinet too, just as backup. I'd pulled one out alongside the GPS. The needle was slowly turning clockwise, not snapping to north like it should have. I figured maybe the GPS was interfering, so I set them apart. No change. I pulled out a second compass, different model, different brand, same thing. The needle pointed southeast for a second, then twitched and drifted to the east, then wobbled again. I checked both against the big map we keep mounted on the wall, just to see if maybe the storm had thrown off something magnetic. But even the big orienteering compass in the emergency kit was acting weird. All of them were slowly drifting, and I noticed something else. They were all settling in the same direction, not north. Not even consistent with each other at first. But after a few minutes, every needle had drifted to point, roughly, toward the woods behind the cabin. Not the trailhead either. the deep part. The thick trees we never let the kids play near because it gets marshy and dense and just sort of strange after a certain point. I didn't say anything right away. My wife was trying to get the lantern to stop flickering, and the kids were getting antsy. I put the compasses down and double-checked the windows and doors, mostly just out of habit. It wasn't late yet, but the sky had gone that cloudy gray where you couldn't tell what time it really was. By 8, it was dark. No moon, no stars. We should have at least seen the town lights over the ridge, or a plane or something. It was just black outside. Dead quiet, too. No frogs, no wind. Even the trees had gone still. I went out onto the porch with the flashlight, trying not to look like I was checking for anything. I scanned the tree line, then looked back at the house and froze. All 3 compasses were on the table inside, right where I left them, but they weren't pointing in the same direction anymore. They had shifted. Not wildly, just maybe 10 or 15 degrees to the left. Still pointing toward the woods, but not the same spot as before. I went back in and turned off the lantern for a second, just to look. Out the back windows, there was nothing. No lights, no movement. Just the silhouette of the trees. I stared at the edge of the forest for a while, thinking maybe I'd see headlights or a flashlight, something to explain why everything felt so weirdly heavy. But there was nothing. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't at the front door. It was on the back wall. Not the door, just the wall. One knock. Not loud. Not even really forceful. Just a dull tap, like someone knocked with their knuckles once and then waited. I stood there, staring at the wall. My wife looked up from the couch, confused. She heard it too. I didn't move. Neither did she. A few seconds later, another knock. This one closer to the window. I grabbed the flashlight again, ran to the back door, yanked it open, and shined the light across the porch and into the yard. Nothing. No footprints in the snow, no shapes in the trees, just stillness. I stepped out and turned in a slow circle, watching for any movement. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. That pressure, like something was just outside the range of the flashlight, like it should have been visible, but wasn't. I backed inside, locked the door, and this time I told my wife. I told her about the compasses, the GPS, the knock. We kept our voices low, mostly because the kids were starting to notice that something was off. I tried calling 911, but the phone still had no signal. Even the emergency feature wouldn't connect. Just a dead screen. At 9:12, all the compasses shifted again. I wrote it down on a notepad because it felt important. They all turned maybe 20 degrees, still pointing into the woods, but now toward the left of the clearing. My wife watched them with me. She didn't say anything, just kept glancing at the windows. At 9:38, the GPS pinged once. Just for a second. A single green bar lit up, then vanished. The screen said position locked, then blinked back to acquiring satellites. I checked the coordinates it had briefly displayed. Something about them didn't make sense. I looked them up later. They weren't where we were, not even close. The GPS had for about 3 seconds thought we were about 6 miles southeast, near a stretch of woods with no roads, no trails, and no structures. After that, the batteries in both the GPS and the lantern started draining fast. The lantern dimmed, the GPS shut off. I checked the kids' walkie-talkies. Dead too, not low. Just dead. Like the batteries had been yanked out. I opened the backs. The batteries were still there, snug in their slots, brand new ones. I tested them later. They were fine. At 10, the lights came back on. No warning. Just everything humming to life like nothing had happened. The phones got signal again. The landline rang twice, then went quiet. Nobody was on the other end. The GPS booted up and locked in immediately. The coordinates were normal again. The compasses, though, that's the part that stuck with me. They didn't correct. Even after the power came back, even with everything else working, the compass needles still pointed toward the woods. Not magnetic north, just that same spot. The next morning, I took a walk out that way, past the clearing into the woods. The compasses kept pointing me deeper in. I followed the bearing for maybe half a mile, then stopped. There was nothing there. No trail, no clearing, no signs of anyone having passed through. Just trees. But the air felt off, still, charged. I turned around and went home. I didn't take the kids back out there after that. We started using a different cabin the next summer. The old one's still there, still in good shape, but we haven't stayed overnight again. I didn't think much about the voicemail at first. It was late on a Thursday night, maybe around 11:30, and I was just winding down after work, sitting on my couch with a beer. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I saw I had a missed call from unknown. I almost didn't pick it up, but curiosity got the better of me, so I checked the voicemail. The message was just static at first. I could hear crackling and this low, weird noise that sounded like it was underwater or something. Then there was a voice, but it was all garbled, like someone talking through a broken radio or underwater. I couldn't make out any words, just random syllables mixed with bursts of static. It was kind of hard to listen to without feeling a little unsettled. After the voice, there were these three loud, high-pitched tones, one after another. They weren't musical or anything, more like emergency alert beeps or alarms. They were piercing, even through the phone speaker. Then the voicemail ended. I played it again, just to be sure I hadn't imagined parts of it. Same thing. Nothing that sounded like an actual message. No number, no name, nothing but that messed up voice and the three tones. Here's the thing. I never gave my phone number out to anyone recently. I'm pretty private about that. No new friends, no work contacts, no orders online or anything. It's not like I have some secret number, but I was positive no one new had it. And the call came from unknown, which means no caller ID, no traceable number on my end. I thought maybe it was some kind of prank or spam call, but the way the voicemail sounded was different. Not like the usual robot voices or recorded ads. This felt like someone was trying to send a message and either didn't want me to understand it or couldn't make it clear. That was Thursday. The next day, I went through my usual routine, but I kept thinking about that message. I even showed it to a friend of mine who's good with audio stuff, asking if they could clean it up or make sense of it. They ran it through some filters and noise reduction, but all they got was more static and some faint digital tones underneath. No words, no code, nothing. They said it was probably just corrupted audio. But I didn't buy that. Something about it felt intentional, like a warning, maybe. Friday night, I started to notice little things around my apartment that felt off. At first, it was small stuff. The lights flickering in the kitchen for a second, even though I checked the bulbs and wiring the next day and everything was fine. My Wi-Fi kept dropping in and out, which was weird because I live alone and no one else was streaming or gaming. My phone showed a bunch of weird notifications that I didn't open. Blank messages, strange numbers, sometimes a notification from a contact named HEP0000 with no message. I chalked it up to technical glitches or some kind of interference, but I swear the timing felt connected to that voicemail, like someone or something was trying to reach me through electronics. That night, I decided to leave my phone on the charger across the room while I slept. I woke up twice because I thought I heard it buzzing or vibrating, but the screen was always off and the notifications were the same as before. The weirdness didn't stop there. Saturday afternoon, I went out to grab groceries. When I came back, I noticed my car looked like someone had walked around it, but no footprints in the dirt or snow. I live where it's been dry lately. No scratches, no dents, nothing obvious, but the windshield had smudges like fingers had wiped the glass. I don't remember leaving it like that, and the only person with access is me. Inside my apartment, I double-checked the locks and windows, and they were all secure. No sign of forced entry or anything. I live on the third floor, so it's not like someone could sneak in easily without me noticing. Still, that feeling like someone had been close lingered. By Sunday, I was starting to feel genuinely unnerved. I kept the lights on all evening and sat with my phone in hand, playing that voicemail on repeat, trying to find any clue I missed. Sometimes the static would crackle and hiss, and I swear I could hear faint breathing or whispering behind it. Not words, just sounds that felt deliberate. Then I started hearing noises outside at night. Soft tapping on my window, sometimes a faint hum in the air. I checked every time, but no one was there. My neighbor's apartment was empty that weekend, so it couldn't be them. I didn't want to call the cops or anyone. It wasn't like a break-in or a direct threat. Just strange things piling up. Things that didn't add up and made me feel watched, like I was under a microscope, but couldn't see the observer. Monday morning, I checked my phone first thing and saw a new voicemail. Same unknown caller ID. I hesitated before listening. It was just static again, but this time it was longer. The crackles felt sharper, the garbled voice stretched out, and at one point I thought I heard a name, maybe mine, but it was distorted beyond recognition. Then the three tones came again, but this time slower, more deliberate. That was it. No more message. I didn't answer any more calls after that. I even considered changing my number, but something made me hesitate. Like whoever was calling wanted me to hear those messages, wanted me to know they were there. I went back through my phone records and found no trace of calls or texts from anyone except the usual contacts. No numbers I didn't recognize except for those voicemails, which all came from unknown. I've tried to forget about it, to move on, but I still check my phone whenever it buzzes, hoping to catch another voicemail. Not because I want to, but because I feel like I need to know if it's still happening. Some nights, I look out the window into the dark and wonder if the caller is nearby or if this is just some signal lost in the noise. I don't know what it means or why me. I just know the static's still there in the back of my mind. I'd been running loads between Laredo and Nashville for a few years when this happened. I was solo at the time, working for a mid-sized company with decent rigs and good routes. I liked driving nights, less traffic, cooler air, just me and the road. This was last summer, late August, I think. I'd left Laredo around 5 p.m. with a full trailer headed to a warehouse outside Memphis. Same route I'd done dozens of times. Weather was clear, road was dry, nothing out of the ordinary. I remember eating a gas station burrito around 10 near Dallas and fueling up before pushing northeast. It was around 2 a.m. when I crossed into Arkansas, just outside Hope. That's where it starts getting weird. I've got a dash cam that records everything, front-facing and cabin. My company requires it, and I usually don't think much about it. It loops automatically, stores clips to an SD card, uploads every few hours when I hit service. I've had it catch a few close calls with deer and one bad fender bender in Oklahoma, but nothing strange before this. Anyway, around 3:15 a.m. I was driving north on Highway 29, just past a rest stop I usually skip. The road there is pretty flat, surrounded by low pine. No lights, no towns for miles. I wasn't tired, not dangerously anyway. I'd had a Coke, windows cracked, just cruising. Then I noticed the radio cut out. Not a static fade, just silence. The screen stayed lit, but no audio. I tapped the knob, flipped stations, nothing. Thought maybe I hit a dead zone, but it had been playing fine for the last 100 miles. A few seconds later, my GPS screen froze. Time, speed, everything just stuck. I tapped it, but it didn't respond. My phone, mounted right next to it, was showing 317. The GPS said 308. I remember that because it felt off, like I was slipping behind somehow. Right then, I felt this pressure in my ears. Not a pop, like from altitude. Just a building tension, like the cabin was sealing itself off. I turned off the vent and listened. It was dead quiet except for the hum of the tires. No engine rattle, no wind, just the sound of the road. Then, just as quickly, everything came back. Radio kicked in mid-song, GPS jumped to 323. The phone was still at 323 too. I figured maybe I'd zoned out a bit and just hadn't noticed. I got to Memphis just after 7 a.m., unloaded, and checked in with dispatch. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I stopped for breakfast, I decided to scroll through the dash cam out of curiosity. I wanted to see if there was any weird interference during that silent period. That's when I saw the gap. From 3:08 a.m. to 3:23 a.m., both camera feeds were just gone. The files jumped from one timestamp to the next as if nothing happened. No corruption warning, no error message, just 15 minutes missing. Everything before and after was perfectly normal. The files were there, labeled in sequence, just those 15 minutes were missing entirely. I assumed maybe the card glitched, so I checked the backup on my laptop. Same thing. Every other hour of the drive was fine. It was just that one block, 3:08 to 3:23, missing from both the forward and cabin views. The weird part? The GPS shows I was still moving. I didn't pull over or stop, and my truck's logbook recorded steady speed the whole time. No sudden decelerations, no hard braking, just normal driving. I didn't think much more of it until later that night, when I was parked in a motel in Jackson, waiting for my next load. I decided to check the internal truck cam, the one above the rearview mirror that catches a wider angle of the cabin. I usually don't pull from it unless there's a reason. It just stores low-res footage as a backup. I synced it to my laptop, skipped ahead to the 3:08 timestamp. It recorded something. The clip was there, but it was off. The cabin was lit by the dash lights. You could see me, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I was driving, not slumped over or unconscious, just blank. No blinking, no glancing at mirrors, no fidgeting, totally still. Eyes locked straight ahead. I watched it 3 times. It's hard to explain, but it didn't look like me. Not really. It looked like someone trying to be me. Like a really good actor who just couldn't quite get the movements right. I never moved, not once. Just drove straight for 15 minutes like I was on autopilot. Even creepier, my mouth was slightly open, not breathing heavy or anything, just open. No sound, just still. The truck didn't drift, didn't slow down. Everything on the instrument panel stayed normal. But the camera caught this flicker, like interference. Every few seconds, there'd be a quick pulse of static across the screen, horizontal lines, really fast. No sound with it, just a visual glitch. The outside cam didn't catch any of that, just the inside one. There weren't any headlights behind me, no oncoming cars. I checked the GPS playback. I was on a straight stretch the whole time, no turns, no exits, no stops. Just 15 miles of flat road and pine trees, driving with a blank stare and my mouth slightly open. After 3:23, everything snapped back to normal. In the next clip, I'm reaching for a drink, checking mirrors, blinking. I look tired, but alert. Just regular driving again. I showed the footage to a mechanic friend of mine who used to drive long haul. He said, maybe I nodded off with my eyes open, but that doesn't explain the dashcam footage still running before and after, or why only that one segment was missing, or why the backup cam caught it while the main one didn't. I didn't report it to dispatch. What would I even say? Truck drove itself while I sat there like a mannequin. I figured if there was an electrical fault, it would have shown up on diagnostics, but nothing did. A week later, I went back and checked the data again. The 3:08 to 3:23 clip from the internal cam had degraded. Not corrupted exactly, just fuzzier, like it had been copied and recopied too many times. The facial detail was harder to see. The flickers were still there though, still regular, every 7 seconds, like clockwork. I started keeping an analog watch on the dash after that, just as a backup, something not tied to the system. I also swapped the SD card and ran a second cam in the sleeper cab, just in case. I've done that route 6 times since. Nothing weird, no lost time, no flickers, no blank stares, but I haven't driven that exact stretch of 29 in the middle of the night again. I time it differently now. I leave earlier or later, just in case. We weren't planning to stop. It just sort of happened. We were driving back from visiting her parents out in Boone. It was late, close to midnight, and we were coming down that long stretch of 221 before it curves south past the ridges. It's quiet up there at night. No houses, barely any lights, just empty roads and forest. You can usually see stars real clear once you get up high enough. She saw the turnout first, just a gravel patch off the road with a guardrail, one of those overlooks people pull into during the day to take photos. She asked if we could stop for a few minutes, stretch our legs. I wasn't in a hurry, so I pulled in. I cut the engine but left the battery on so we could still have the heater going. It was cold for April. Not freezing, but that kind of mountain chill that sticks in your jacket. We got out and leaned against the hood. The view was pretty good. No clouds, barely a breeze, sky full of stars. We didn't say much at first, just stood there. About 5 minutes in, she got back in the car to warm up. I stayed outside. That's when I noticed the weird feeling. Not a sound or anything, just a pressure. Like my ears were popping, except they weren't. The air felt off. Heavy, maybe? Not storm heavy, just strange. I figured maybe I needed to pop my ears, so I swallowed and yawned a few times. Didn't help. She rolled down the window and said, "Do the lights look dim to you?" I looked over. The interior dome light was on since her door hadn't shut all the way, and yeah, it looked lower than normal. Not flickering, not dying, just faint, like it was running on half power. I walked over and opened my door. The dashboard lights were dim too. The radio screen was on, but the numbers looked fuzzy, almost like a dying flashlight. I figured maybe the battery was going bad, which didn't make sense since the car was only 2 years old, but still, we'd had it in for service just a couple months back. I got in and turned the key to start the engine. Nothing. No click, no attempt, not even a starter sound. Just nothing. She looked at me and asked if the battery was dead. I didn't answer right away, I just stared at the dash. All the lights faded out completely, one by one, until the whole car went black. I tried the key again. Dead. I even popped the hood and checked the terminals. They were tight, no corrosion, the headlights wouldn't come on, the dome light was out, even the hazard lights wouldn't work. It was like the whole electrical system just shut down at the same time. While I was standing there with the hood open, I heard something weird. It was really faint at first, like the hum of an old refrigerator. I thought it might have been in my head. But she stepped out and said, "Do you hear that?" So it wasn't just me. It was low, but not from any one direction, almost like it was coming from the air itself. Not like a plane overhead or anything mechanical. Just this steady vibration, like standing next to a big engine, except there wasn't anything around us. No cars on the road, no buildings, no power lines nearby. I started looking up. The stars were still out, but something felt wrong about the sky. It's hard to explain. There wasn't anything obvious to see, no lights or shapes, but there was this feeling of being watched, like something was above us and we just couldn't see it. She stood next to me, arms crossed, really quiet. Then she said, "My phone's not working." I pulled mine out. No signal, which wasn't too weird. Those mountains have dead zones, but the weird part was the screen. It lit up when I tapped it, but none of the apps would open. Just frozen. Like it was trying to work, but couldn't. I tried to restart it, but it just stayed on the shutdown screen. That hum kept going. Louder, but not in a way that made noise. It just pressed against you. Like it was in your bones. We both got back in the car, didn't say anything, just sat there. That's when I noticed the air had stopped moving. No wind, not even the usual draft you feel when the heater vents are off. The whole car felt sealed, like a vacuum. Our breaths fogged the windows, but they didn't clear. Then everything went dead silent. No bugs, no night birds, no rustle of trees, just absolute stillness, except for that low hum. We sat like that for maybe 5 minutes. It felt like longer. I didn't want to open the door again. I didn't want to look up anymore. I just stared at the dash, hands on the wheel like I was waiting at a red light. Then it all stopped. No build-up, no fade-out, just gone. The hum, the pressure, the weird air. The dome light blinked back on by itself. The dash lit up. Her phone vibrated on the console. I turned the key. The engine started like nothing was wrong. We didn't talk the rest of the way home. Not a word. Not until we pulled into the driveway and she finally said, "I don't want to go back there." I nodded. I didn't either. The next morning, I checked the battery with a multimeter. Full charge, clean terminals. I drove the car all week, no issues. I even checked for recalls. Nothing. I didn't mention it to anyone else. Not because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I just didn't know how to explain it. We never did go back up that road at night. Even when we took trips out that way, we stuck to the lower routes. I still wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed longer, or gotten out again, or looked straight up. I was brushing my teeth when the power cut out. It was around 11:30 p.m. I'd just come in from feeding the goats, and the air had that heavy, quiet feeling it gets out here at night. We're about 6 miles from town, surrounded by open fields and dirt roads. Nearest neighbors maybe half a mile down. When the lights went out, I figured it was just a line issue. We get those sometimes when the wind picks up. But there was no wind. No thunder, no flicker. Just a full stop. The bathroom light blinked out mid-motion, and the hum from the fridge and water heater vanished with it. Even the outside motion sensor light didn't come on when I stepped into the hallway. Just black. I rinsed my mouth in the dark and walked to the front door to see how far the outage went. My phone was charging on the counter, and I left it behind without thinking, which I ended up regretting. Outside, everything looked off. It wasn't just dark, it felt drained. The stars were out, but they seemed dimmer than usual, like someone had thrown a veil over the sky. No bugs, no frogs. Even the goats were quiet. I stood there on the porch for a bit, thinking maybe I should drive into town, let the power company know, but then I heard it. A sound that didn't fit. It wasn't loud. It actually took me a second to realize it was even there. A low hum, almost like a big transformer, but smoother. Constant, no pulsing or breaks. I thought at first it was coming from the fields to the north, where there's an old grain elevator, but when I stepped off the porch and turned toward it, I couldn't place the direction. The sound didn't seem to come from a single spot. It was just around. I walked out into the yard, slow, more curious than anything. The hum wasn't getting louder, but it had weight to it, like I could feel it in my chest if I stood still. I looked up, and for a second I didn't notice anything wrong. But then I realized the stars were missing. Not all of them, just in one big section of the sky, right above me. A huge, uneven black shape, darker than the sky around it, with no lights or reflections, just this moving absence. I didn't even see it move at first. It was that slow. But it was definitely moving, drifting west to east, like a cloud blocking the stars. Except it wasn't shaped like a cloud, and there were no edges I could make out. Just a massive silhouette sliding silently across the sky with that hum following it. I couldn't tell how high up it was. It didn't seem close, but it also didn't look like something that big should be flying that slow. No sound of engines, no lights blinking like on a plane, nothing. I kept staring, not really thinking, just trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it stopped. Not entirely. It still drifted a little, but the motion slowed almost to nothing. The hum stayed steady, and I realized it was louder now, even though I hadn't moved. I looked around and saw that the air itself felt strange, like the pressure had changed. Hard to explain, but it was like my ears were plugged, the way they get in an elevator, but more even and soft. I took a step back toward the porch without meaning to. Something about standing there under it started making me nervous. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. Like being watched, but not from one spot, from everywhere. The goats started bleating all at once. Loud, frantic. Not their usual cries either, more panicked. I turned toward the pen and saw them clustered in a corner, pressed up against the fence like they were trying to get through it. I'd never seen them like that. The hum got sharper, not louder, but thinner, like a tight wire pulled too far. I felt it in my teeth. I turned to go back inside, but the porch light snapped on as I stepped up and everything went quiet. The hum stopped. The goats went silent. I turned around and the sky looked normal again. Stars back where they should be. No shape, no movement. I stood there for a minute, hand on the doorframe, just staring. The porch light flickered once and held. Inside, the clock on the microwave was blinking 12. Power had come back on. I went in, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. It was at 82%, still charging. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing. I opened the camera app and stepped back outside, but there was nothing to see. I walked to the goat pen with the flashlight. They were still huddled, but quieter now. Their eyes looked wild, like they'd just come out of a thunderstorm. I checked the fence, checked the feed bin, everything was fine. No prints or signs of anything coming near them. I stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, walking the property, shining the light over the fields, the trees, the road. No sound except my own boots. Nothing out of place, nothing to explain it. The next morning, I checked the power company's outage map online. No reported service disruptions in my area. I called just to be sure, and the rep told me the grid was stable all night. Said maybe my breaker tripped or I had a brownout. I didn't argue. Later that afternoon, I talked to my neighbor down the road, an older guy named Pete. I asked if he lost power the night before. He looked at me funny and said no. Said his lights were on all night and he watched TV till past midnight. That didn't make sense. I can see his house from my backyard. If his lights had been on, I would have seen them. That night, I checked the porch camera. It's motion activated and records in 10-second clips. I scrolled back to the time I remembered the power going out. There was a blank space, just a gap between 11:32 and 11:54. No recordings, nothing. But then I noticed something else. Just before the gap, there's a clip of me walking into the house after feeding the goats. Normal. The next recording at 11:54 shows the porch light blinking on by itself. No one there. Then the feed continues as normal. I exported the gap anyway, just to have it, even though it's literally nothing. Just black. I don't know what I expected. A few nights later, the goats refused to come out of the shed at dusk. I had to pull 2 of them by the collar just to get them to eat. Same deal the next night. Then they stopped going near the east side of the pen altogether. They still won't. I tried moving their feed bin, thinking maybe a coyote or something had gotten close, but there's never any sign. No tracks, no scat, nothing. I've been sleeping with the blinds closed now, which I never used to do. I keep the porch light on all night. I don't know why. It just feels wrong not to. I haven't seen the shape again. No more hum. Nothing obviously strange. But some nights I swear the stars over the field look off, like they're not in quite the right spot. Could be my imagination. But I notice. I was fiddling with my radio setup late one night, just the usual stuff. I've been messing with amateur radio for a few years now, mostly local chatter, emergency frequencies, random stuff. It's a hobby, something to pass the time and keep my brain busy. That night, I was tuning through some less used bands, trying to catch any signals that might be out there. Around 2 a.m., I heard this weird repeating sequence on one of the frequencies I don't usually check. It was faint but clear enough to stand out from the static. It sounded like a voice, or maybe a computer-generated voice, repeating numbers over and over. At first, I thought it was some kind of test transmission or maybe a prank, but the pattern was too steady, too precise. The numbers were coordinates. I jotted them down, latitude and longitude. It wasn't a place I recognized offhand, but I figured I'd check it out in the daylight. I saved the recording on my laptop and went to bed, thinking it was probably nothing. But the coordinates kept bugging me. The next morning, I loaded the coordinates into Google Maps. It pointed to a spot about an hour outside town, somewhere in the middle of a national forest. Not exactly a popular hiking area, just thick woods and some dirt roads. I thought, what the hell, I've got the day off. I might as well see what's there. I packed a small bag, water, flashlight, my radio gear just in case, and drove out to the spot. The road got rough and narrow as I got closer, but I made it to a little clearing the GPS showed as the exact coordinates. At first, it looked like any other patch of forest floor. Just dirt, leaves, pine needles, that kind of stuff. Then I noticed the ground was different in one area. A perfect circle, about 10 feet across, completely blackened. The edges were sharp, like someone had burned that spot clean, but weirdly contained. It wasn't just charred leaves or branches. The dirt itself looked scorched, like it had been burned from something intense. I knelt down and touched it cautiously. The ground was warm, not hot, but warmer than the surrounding earth, like it had been heated recently. I checked my watch. It had been maybe a day or two since the radio transmission, so it seemed strange for the heat to last that long. I scanned around for any sign of campfires or human activity, but there was nothing. No footprints, no trash, no tire tracks, nothing. I pulled out my radio and tried tuning back to that frequency. At first, I heard nothing but static, but then the signal came back, the same sequence of numbers, repeating steadily. It was faint, but definitely there. I recorded it again, this time from the site. I stood up and looked around. The forest felt different here. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just silence, thick and heavy. I felt like I was being watched. But when I scanned the woods with my eyes and flashlight, I didn't see anything. I packed up and started walking back to my truck, but on the way, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something small and dark darted behind a tree. I stopped and stared. Whatever it was, it moved silently and quickly, disappearing before I could get a good look. Back at the truck, I looked at the recordings. The voice, or whatever it was, kept repeating the coordinates. No other sounds, no explanation, just those numbers over and over. That night at home, I kept hearing static on my radio even when I wasn't tuned to that frequency. Sometimes faint tapping or clicks, almost like Morse code but scrambled. I recorded it hoping to make sense of it later, but I never did. The weirdest part? I started losing chunks of time, small gaps where I couldn't remember what I was doing. Not like passing out, but moments just missing. I'd be doing something normal, walking to the kitchen, checking my phone, and then suddenly I'd be somewhere else, unsure how I got there. I told a friend about it, and he suggested maybe I was stressed or sleep deprived, but I wasn't. I was fine before all this started. I went back to the site a few days later, like hoping to find something new, but the circle was gone. No scorch marks, no warmth, nothing unusual. Just normal forest floor, as if whatever had been there never existed. I've tried to ignore it, but sometimes I'll catch that frequency again, those numbers repeating. And sometimes I think I see shadows moving just beyond the edge of the trees near my house, shapes that don't belong. I still don't know what it was or what it wanted. All I have are those numbers and that burned circle, and the feeling that something was watching, waiting.